Let me call to order the Williamsport City Council budget work session number 1. It's Monday. We keep changing the day of the week we meet. November 27th. Please rise for an invocation by Councilwoman Liz Mealy, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. This time of year always finds us and cultures throughout the world in a mood to celebrate. It's a festive season, a time of sparkling lights, glittering baubles, and often willy-nilly spending. But our job over the next few weeks as Williamsport City Council is very serious indeed, to help guide the administration and the city into our best economic choices, to try to use our limited funds to do the most good, to prevent, at all costs, willy-nilly spending. Let everyone here accept that responsibility with serious kindness and equanimity. Let us also remember all those in our city for whom this is a time not of festivity but of greatest need, a time when the winter chill bites, when waning daylight makes the strongest of us feel feeble, when our costs rise and our moods tumble. Let us remember those with the greatest needs among us, and let us help meet one another's needs with a generous spirit and all the love that's in the season. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Liz. As we do every year, we spend this time reviewing the administration's budget proposal in 2 parts tonight. We deal with the utility fund, income estimates, general government, in the mayor's office, Department of Streets and Parks, and miscellaneous fund budgets. And it looks like we get to start with River Valley Transit. Mr. Nichols.
Good evening.
Good evening.
President Williamson, Vice President Allison, members of council. As usual, I hand out our service delivery highlights for this year, 2017, and just a couple mentions, I guess. We had a very busy year with ridership approaching 1,300,000 individuals. We received 6 more CNG vehicles. We now have 10 in our fleet, and we expect 8 more during the first part of next year. So we'll have 18, and that's pretty much a good majority of our fleet. So they've turned out to be very successful. We also continue to work with PennDOT on its regionalization effort. In particular, it's our 6th year managing best transit. We also have been working with Clinton County officials on expanding services into Clinton County and Lock Haven. Somewhat delayed because of the impasse of the state budget, but I think that's been resolved, and we expect to get that going in the first quarter of next year. We embarked on e-commerce where you could buy online tickets now for the Hiawatha, and boy, that turned to be much more successful than I ever expected. Over half our public cruise tickets were sold online.
On Cyber Monday?
What's that?
On Cyber Monday?
No. I didn't think about that. But you can buy your Tour Light tickets online now.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to mention that. That's under ridetrolley.com. So if you get on there, I know they're going fast, but we're using Fair Harbor, which is the e-commerce site, and it's worked very well. In fact, I think I had a lot to do with the record ridership in the Hiawatha, over 27,000 passengers. So it's a way to go, obviously. We assisted the City of Williamsport with 2 major capital projects, the Bowman Field Stadium renovations project and the Rockby grant, as well as Connect Williamsport, which is obviously still ongoing. And the last thing I want to mention is about the Trade and Transit Center 2, its first full year of operation, including the Michael Ross Event Center. And a little advertising, we had over 110 events in that facility in 2017, which it's turning out to be a nice venue for a lot of different groups and organizations throughout the area. So we're happy to see that happen. But anyway, turning to RVT's budget, under that tab on page 1 is our projected revenues which are itemized, and the first line item is bus fares, $820,000 for 2018 based on service levels, projected ridership, advertising, $25,000, sale bus billboards for the most part. Bus charters, $10,000, other income, $17,391, operating subsidy federal, which is based on, driven by our ridership, performance factors, and the bonus factors that we're able to achieve. Operating subsidy state, $4,192,438, which is by formula. And operating subsidy municipal, $368,171. Operating subsidy other, what we mean by other partners, such as the hospital, the colleges, $50,000. Interest income, $2,000. Program income, $350,000, which is primarily revenue from Church Street parking, and a program income transfer of $150,000, which is then transferred for debt service for a total budget of $7,285,000, and there's corresponding projected expenditures under 3 categories: administration, vehicle operations, and maintenance on the following pages.
Comments or questions? Members of council or Council-elect Slaughter?
Where is he?
I'm sorry?
Oh, fine, no, I just kidding. Why the Christmas tree?
When this Christmas tree starts talking.
Yeah.
Mr. Allison.
Mr. Nichols, the maintenance line, is there going to, do you notice any change with CNG buses, required maintenance as far as opposed to regular buses?
You'll notice I think our vehicle parts budget is $300,000 for next year, which I think is slightly up. Certain parts are more expensive, but overall, I think so far, they've been less maintenance. I know, in particular, we have hybrid buses, which are, when something goes wrong with those, are very expensive to fix. So I think overall, again, it's relatively new with all these buses. We're getting all the new buses sort of all at once, but I think in the long run, I think it's going to serve to be, less costly in terms of maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Depends on the gas supplier. No, I'm just kidding.
We'll see what we can do about it.
Ms. Mealy.
Do we track things like that over the lives of the vehicle?
I'm sorry?
Do we track things like that over the lives of our buses?
Yes,
That is to
we
say,
do. We have
especially, do we compare them to other manufacturers and things like that? I guess that's part of the question.
We do have a maintenance program which can do that. It does do that. That's something I have really looked at. We have primarily 2 types of buses, New Flyer and Gilligs. New Flyers have been very good, but with the state contracts that we've been piggybacking on, it's been Gillig. So we're finally going to achieve our goal of having just one particular type of bus, Gillig. Okay. So that's going to save a lot of money in parts, inventory, that type of thing, because of, the buses will be basically the same in a lot of respects.
It'd be interesting once we've had our fleet of CNG and our fleet of hybrids for a couple of years to sort of hear about first-year performance, or, first 3-year performance for, a totally gas-powered vehicle versus a totally natural gas-powered vehicle versus a hybrid vehicle. Because if the hybrids, say, cost more to fix but need to be fixed less often, or if the, it'd be interesting to see how the savings sort out. But.
The big cost that we will have to undertake is tank replacement. There is a life expectancy
For the natural gas
for
tanks.
the natural gas buses that we'll have to deal with before the actual bus has reached its useful life. But so
And that's because of the pressure factor, I assume.
I'm not sure. It's just a requirement that you have to place your tanks at a certain point in time.
Certainly wouldn't want to lose one when you were driving around, I don't think, right? Anyway, thanks, Mr. Nichols.
Is there any training courses for, maintaining these buses?
And in the state there is. We've sent our mechanics to Philadelphia. SEPTA has some training courses, and they're Cummins engines. So there's a local Cummins dealer, which we're thankful for. So as much training we can get to, we do.
So you're trying to keep as much in-house as possible then for training to retire?
Yes, and we've had we're having a generational change at RVT. I guess I've been there a long time, so all the people that were hired when I first started are now retiring. So we're getting a lot of new people, and Penn College has a diesel program, not really a CNG program, so that's unfortunate, but maybe they'll get into that. But so we're doing a lot of training on our own, but we're being assisted by, places that do have that particular training like SEPTA. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else on page 2?
Page 2 is administration under personal services. We have administrative salaries, $302,000, the corresponding benefit line items, life insurance, health insurance, FICA, pensions. We also have physical exams. We're required to do drug testing, and then unemployment compensation for a total of $1,431,000. Under purchase of services, our telephone's $28,000, travel $4,500, light and power $90,000. And that's, if you look in past budgets, this is a lot higher because that's one of the costs associated with CNG is compression. So, that it does add to the cost, but still, even with that additional cost, as well as the cost of CNG and maintenance, is far less than what we're paying for diesel right now, which has gone up quite a bit. It's approaching, it's well over $2 now, and it's more than double what we pay for CNG. Service contracts, $95,000, primarily, what we pay to STEP under our contract for them to provide paratransit service, our City Bus Plus, our RVT Plus program, as well as security that we hire for our downtown facilities. Hearings litigation, $3,000, planning, $450,000, which is a transfer to the planning budget. Subscription and dues, $3,500. Administrative services, $75,000. Auditing services, $36,000, and this also funds a portion of the city's single audit as well as our own financial statements that are due on 6/30 and other federal and state requirements that we have to adhere to. And
Go ahead
then
and finish the section.
Yeah, and then on the next page, supplies and materials, you have general office supplies, $35,000, insurance, $3,500, heat, $10,000, which is a lot less than we used to pay because we have our whole maintenance facility is heated by used oil. Facility maintenance, $65,000, and contingency, $221,300. And there's about $200,000 to set aside for the expanded services to Clinton County. Again, as I mentioned, it was delayed because of the state budget impasse, but that's what we would come to council transfers once we get that proposed services on the road. So for a total of $2,550,800 for administration.
Comments or questions? Mrs. Katz?
Could you repeat what you said about the heat?
We have, when we redid our facility about 3-4 years ago, we installed several waste oil heaters. And so we use our own oil to heat our facility in the back. It's a $100,000 facility, and I would say the maintenance area and the storage area is probably 80% of it or more. And so, we used oil to heat that area. We also have thermal wells also to supplement that heat if needed, and which is that heats the front part of the building. So we've been able to save a lot of money by doing that.
That's a huge savings.
What's that?
That's a huge savings.
Oh, it's huge saving, yes.
Thank you.
Other comments? Questions? Under administrative services, what does that go for? I don't remember.
It goes to city.
Oh, is
You'll
that?
see it on the
okay.
city revenues.
That's right. And my other question is the contingency, the money that you said was to expand for Clinton County Services, is that the matching portion of that increase more or less the change on operating subsidy state between, where does the revenue for paying for Clinton County expanded service come in?
The state grant that we'll receive funds 85%
Okay,
of the cost of the service.
okay,
So
so,
there is a small local share, which you'll see in the local share line item on the revenues is increased slightly based on that projection,
okay.
but
So what I see is between budget and 17 and budget 18 is more or less an increase of about 145,000 from state and 48,000 from local, and that's
the
all about
200,000
Clinton.
for, right.
Okay.
That's about the 200, we figure for Clinton County.
Okay, sounds good, thank you. If there are no other comments, next section.
Next page is page 4. Vehicle operations, personal services, supervision, $328,000. Driver's wages, $1,865,000. 34 drivers and 1 part-time who drive over 800,000 miles a year on 21 different routes. For a total of $2,338,000 on a purchase of services, training and safety for all divisions of RVT, $55,000, a transfer to the Trade and Transit Center budget of $600,000, bus fuel, $450,000, again, a lot less than we used to pay in this particular line item, oil and grease, $15,000, shop equipment, $5,000, uniforms by contract, $15,000, printing and copies for our ride guide and our fare box supplies, $25,000, advertising, $135,000, insurance fleet through safety, which is a state consortium of most of the transit system in Pennsylvania, which is primarily self-insured, $155,000, insurance drivers, $200, for a total of $3,793,200.
Comments or questions? The transfer trade and transit of $600,000, that's debt service? Is it,
You'll see the debt service is in the planning budget,
okay, so,
I think.
so this transfer?
No, it is, I'm sorry, you're right, it is in trade and transit, so the debt service, $650,000.
Okay, why put it under vehicle operations?
Because transfer trade and transit was originally just for operations of operating the trade and transit center.
Okay,
But we've added debt service in that particular line, and we didn't want to establish a different debt service budget, so.
I suppose I would have thought that it would have been under administration or somewhere other than vehicle operations.
It's, well, we put it there because some of the revenues that we receive from trade and transit, Church Street, what have you, fund our debt service, part of our debt service, which you'll see as a revenue line item under program income.
Right. But it's an expense under vehicle operations. So I know
Because
it's
there's a lot-
just a pass-through, but,
Well, there's a lot more that's in that 600,000, just debt service. Program income is the biggest provider of funding for debt service. 600,000 is more for just operating the trade and transit center facilities, employees, what have you. So you really shouldn't associate the 600 with debt service. Maybe there's a small part there, but it's still a transfer, trade and transit.
or why not? I mean, I'm just thinking about it from a structuring and accounting standpoint. Of course, I'm not an accountant, so maybe I'm wrong. Why not just have it transfer into the, I mean,
Well, this is how the auditors, we worked it out with the auditors.
Okay,
It
that's
seemed to be
fine.
the best way to track it.
it's just, the way money flows through the RVT budget is always confusing to me because it flows through it very differently than it does through the city's budget.
Right.
Okay. Other comments? Ms. Neal?
Well, the funding and financing is primarily related to trade and transit, Church Street, trade and transit 1, trade and transit 2, you know, that's,
Right.
again, that's why it's located in that particular budget, because that affiliation is mostly there in that particular budget.
Okay. Ms. Mealy?
Well, so walk us through, I suppose, all the places where debt service comes and goes throughout the RVT budget, just for the sake of clarity. So we've got some element of debt service in the transfer to trade and transit, element of vehicle operations. There's debt service in projected expenditures, obviously, for the planning element. Just trying to sort of track it because it does get confusing, especially perhaps for those who haven't seen the budget before, period. So where else is there accounting for some element of debt service?
Well, we'll
in
get to
RVT's
that when we
budget?
get to the Trade and Transit Center budget. Maybe that's the best way to, unless we
Okay.
jump there now.
I'm just kind of curious to track one, we can address it again when we get there. I'm just kind of curious to track one element of the budget through several different pages here.
So,
Well, again,
are all, so there's expenditures that are really transfers, and there are expenditures that are actual expenditures, i.e. we write a check to the bank, more or less,
Well, the
right?
expenditures of trade and transit are related expenses for operating those facilities as well as debt service, which is relatively new in the budget. It's been only there for a few years.
Right, and
The
so
transfer has been always around at least $400,000, $500,000.
are there other, I think Ms. Mealy's question is, are there other places in any of the RVT budgets where there is a check written to a bank version of a line of debt service? Other
It all comes
than,
out of trade and transit.
okay. And the rest are all
Everything
transfers?
Transfers in, and then the debt service is then fully budgeted in the Trade and Transit Center budget.
So page 79560 is the total actual expenditure for debt service. The rest of it is all transfers into that budget
Yeah, if you look at the
somewhere.
revenues, we have rental income. I mean, we don't really take any particular line item and say this is for debt service. It's just,
Right.
it's a balancing number. The balancing number is the transfer from the operating budget. So you have lease rental income of $210,000, which is from Church Street, from the CTL, from Uptown Music Collective, and parking from Third Street. Midtown Lot provides revenue into the budget, which also can be applied partially to debt service, as well as Lot A on Market Street.
I think I found an example that is why I get confused every time I'm trying to follow it in here, is on page 1, we show program income, not all of which, but a lot of that is income from Trade and Transit or Church Street, right?
The $150,000, which is transferred out under the revenue, is in the $450,000 of program income under projected revenues on page 7. All the program income goes towards debt service. The remaining comes from the other line items.
But like, and some of it's just naming, so Trade and Transit lease rental income of 210,000.
Right.
Where is that show on projected revenues on page 1?
It's not. It's on page 7.
So it's only on page 7.
Correct.
But the,
Other than the $150,000, which we showed transferred out of Church Street, parking revenue comes into Trade and Transit under program income.
but that also includes 300,000 from, because program income has 450,000 on page 7.
Right.
And so the other 300,000 is
The
from,
150,000 Church Street, 100,000 from the county, 100,000 from Act 13, 50,000 from CNG sales, and also $50,000 from the administrative fee we charge all the people at fuel up at our site. And, yeah, that's it.
and where is that on page 1 in terms of projected revenues?
It's
not.
different
That's
budgets.
where that comes in.
Okay. But that's what's
Because I
confusing.
can't
Some of
put-
it goes through the other parts of
gotta
our VT
keep-
budget and some doesn't.
I've got to keep the revenues for trade and transplanting separate from our operating budget.
Yeah, sure.
Okay? So because I need some of the Church Street revenue to balance the operating budget, I show the Church Street total revenue in the operating budget and transfer out what I need to go as program income under trade and transit with the other
Yeah.
revenues. But I can't mix the trade and transit and the planning revenues with the operating budget.
Right. It's just hard, I mean, because of that, and everything you just said is, I got to make the federal government happy, right?
Right.
Because of that, it's confusing because it's hard to show income and expenditures across the various budgets. Okay, thank you for explaining it again. I mean, I've been doing,
I mean,
I've been doing it for a while, and I remain confused every year, and
again, trade and
and not
transit.
everybody's been doing it as long
Lease
as I have.
rental income is from our tenants
Yeah.
and from the Third Street parking garage, because we have a lease with the parking authority. That dates back to 1999. The Lot A lot, Uptown CTL, and Susquehanna Trailways, and Fullington.
Do you, by the way, have a listing? I mean, I don't know if you're going by memory or you have it broken down on paper
Oh,
there.
actually, it's by memory, absolutely.
Okay.
No, it's written right down here, my chicken scratching, trust me.
Can you give us a copy
Yeah,
of Chicken
I can
Scratch?
write-
Just
I'll type
'cause
it out.
we can stick it in the folder and
That's
maybe
not a
you'll
problem.
avoid asking these same questions
not a
next year.
problem.
Yeah. It's just trying to keep track of it all.
And then under program income, you have the 150,000 Church Street, the agreement we have with the county for $100,000. If you remember, we passed an intergovernmental agreement, not 3-4 years ago. The church, CNG station, we have the public station, which we derive income from, as well as the administrative fees from all the fueling partners we have. So, you know, that's how we capture what we call program income.
Thank you for answering all of those.
But
Anybody
I can
else?
give you a listing of that.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, really. Anything else on this, then? If not, then we move on to page 5. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Katz.
Just break this down. It's, what you're saying is RVT is ridership, and that goes in a separate file. The other is people that pay money into the lease programs.
Right.
So that's why, to break it down into a simple, and you have to
Right.
divide that. You
Right,
cannot,
because of the federal and state funding, so you have your main operating budget, and then the other two budgets are trade and transit, the facilities, and the related debt service, which is paid for by all the program income, and you know, we've been able to match our debt service to the developments that we've been doing. And then our planning budget, which relates to contract services. That's where we separate operating best transit and the parking authority, and those revenues go into that particular budget. So very carefully with the auditors, separated those three components so everything matches up. So when they do an audit for the parking authority, that matches the RVT audit, or the Hiawatha, we do an audit every year. So, I mean, that's why we separate those three functions of RVT.
but you're allowed to, at the one point, to put it bluntly, rob Peter to pay Paul at one point. Is that what you're saying with Church Street?
Church Street is, in terms of balance of the operating budget, we typically need some Church Street revenues. Those are the only revenues that we sort of budget into the operating budget to balance it.
Balance the other.
Right.
Okay.
You know, hopefully, over a period of time, we won't rely on any Church Street revenues, but that's just, you know, how we balance our budget. That's the balancing part of that particular budget.
Okay.
Other comments? Hearing none? Page 5.
That's maintenance, where the supervision's $59,000. Our mechanics' wages are $482,000. Bus repairs, which we just talked about, $300,000. And we have a total fleet of 35 buses and support vehicles. So we probably have 45 vehicles, including our trucks. Materials and supplies, $25,000. Uniforms, $13,000. Tires and tubes, $62,000, for a total of $941,000.
Questions? Go ahead.
Next page? Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Planning budget, we get a Section 8 grant, which is a pass-through money from the county to the Watts MPO process, $56,250. We have a direct allocation of $100,000, planning grant match, $37,500. Again, this is a transfer into the planning budget from operating $450, and transfer from other sources, $178,000. And there's three primary sources that go into that. make up the 178, $100,000 from Best Transit, 60 from the Parking Authority, the remainder from the Hiawatha, for a total of $821,750. And then salaries, which are in the salary details, $604,175. FICA, $45,000, life insurance, $500. Health insurance, $49,000, which you'll see in all the city budget, a 2% decrease, which is sort of unheard of. Out of the hundreds of members in Benetcon, we got the best renewal rate of all of them, which is, again, hard to believe, but it happened. Fee surveys, $13,575, planning expenses, $74,500, special study, $25,000 is where we budget our share of the Park Avenue study, and contingency, $10,000 for a total of $821,750.
Questions? Mrs. Katz?
Where does the Hiawatha come into this? It's under revenue, right?
Yeah, we get like 15,000 a year from them, or between 10 and 15, depending.
That's a separate though, right? It's not under RVT, it's separate, totally separate?
Oh, there's a separate operation, right. But they pay RVT some money for indirect costs. But they have their own separate budget of employees and expenses and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so that won't go under RVT at all then? Or
No,
is there?
no, it's
No,
totally
nothing?
separate.
Okay.
It's because it's a 501c3, separate budget, separate audit, so it's accounted for totally separate.
So even what they pay you doesn't go under RVT?
What they pay us does, that's the only thing that goes in RVT is some indirect costs, typically related to our finances that we do.
All right, other questions? Is the planning expense there earmarked?
I'm sorry?
The planning expense, the 74.5, is that earmarked for particular
That's Delta
contracts?
Development
Delta.
primarily.
Okay.
And we've been absorbing the costs. You'll see that in the city budget, we are proposing some expenditures towards Delta in 2018. RVT has been absorbing all the costs related to administration of the RACB grants, Bowman Field, East 3rd Street, as well as the coordination with Lycoming College. Lycoming College has a relationship with Delta Development, so, you know, because the 3rd Street project has really turned into more of an economic development city project, Lycoming College development project, that, you know, I think it's appropriate that the city pick up the, you know, we can't keep absorbing all those expenses. But they are working some for us. We did budget, you know, what you see there.
Sure. And then in terms of the salaries here, that 600,000 is, I'd have to look it up. How many people, if you know off the top of your head?
One?
One?
No, I'm
You?
just kidding.
It's 11 is from what I
Yeah,
see.
you have,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where we have, you know, the people that are affiliated with contract services, also our special
So a number of
services
those,
manager who manages Best Transit and those type of things.
I was going to say a number.
Kevin
at least-
Kilpatrick, who's our planning manager, and is paid through planning funds, you know, anything that's, you know, it's outside the operating
Right.
part of it.
Several of those are dealing with some of those special things like what you're talking, mostly about Best Transit or whatever.
Best Transit, parking manager, those type of things.
If, Ms. Mealy?
What is, so in last year's budget, we have a project manager under the Office of Planning, WBT. In this year's budget, we have a project grants manager. And the salary's jumping pretty quickly. I'm just wondering, is that person filling a new role that with the different name of the position? And is that the reason for, I think it's an
No.
increase from 15,000 2 years ago to 22,000 this year for a part-time position?
No, that's what we've allocated towards that particular aspect of things. And again, that's just a half, that's just part of, another salary. You see there's two halves there?
Yeah, I was assuming that they were probably the same person instead of two different part-time people.
Correct.
Just wondering why the person is making a bunch more money for one half of their job.
Well, we realigned a lot of things you'll see because under the business compliance manager dropped from 61 to 52.
Yeah,
Procurement manager dropped.
Right.
The
I'm assuming those were new
We
hires.
hire new individuals, and some of these are shared salaries with the city. And one of these individuals was realigned with, we are implementing a new shared ride program called EcoLane, which will be stationed down at our Trade and Transit 2 Center at the call center. So that's a different, really, job description.
Got it.
And so, again, we've really totally realigned a lot of things this year.
Okay.
So is that the same person then? That is the same person, the project grants manager and the program project coordinator / marketing director?
No, it's not the same person.
Oh, so it's two different positions?
Yes,
And two different people?
yes.
Got it.
All right. If there are no other questions, on to the Trade and Transit Center. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Slaughter.
Half one for the program project coordinator is $50,000. That's just for a half, that's part-time, the 49,270.
That number, again, if you look back, is, that person's paid a lot less than that because they're part-time, not full-time. If that person was full-time, that would be the salary. They're only paid part-time. I don't know if you know my marketing person, but he works part-time, so if he worked full-time, that would be the salary. But what he's getting paid is a lot less than that, but it's based on the hourly wage rate that's represented by that salary. So if you divide, if you divide that by 1820, it would come up with a certain hourly wage rate, and that's what we pay him as a part-time individual.
But we've budgeted the full amount of the salary.
I budgeted for a full-time, I've always left a full-time person in there.
So,
Mr. Slaughter.
so where's that extra money go to then? If it's budgeted for full-time, so there's extra obviously sitting around then.
I wouldn't say there's extra sitting around because a lot of these individuals get comp time, things like that. And I don't really have a budget for that. So
it goes out of this full budget
well, it goes out of the total amount that we have budgeted for salaries, but again,
for a full-time
yeah,
person.
there is, if everybody worked just straight, not overtime or comp time, then there would be a little money left over, yes. Provided that the other line items were in line. So you probably made 3/4 of that. We'll make about 3/4 of that in 2017.
Extra goes to other people's.
Well, the extra goes for comp time and other expenses that may or may not happen.
So this is really technically a full-time position, but we have it listed as a half. I mean, we keep it budgeted as a full-time so that you could take that money.
It's
back.
budgeted full-time, but right now he's only working as a part-time employee.
In order to budget it full-time in order to take that money elsewhere.
I guess. I mean, it's,
I'm just
could make him
trying to- I'm just trying to
full-time.
understand.
Because I could hire a full-time, you know, if this person left, then I would probably hire a full-time person.
In the meantime, it's halftime.
Well, it's more than half time, it's about 3/4 time, is about what he makes out of that number.
So he probably makes 3/4 of this. and-
That number, yes. Right. But again, there's no, I don't budget any comp time. All these individuals make comp time. They work over 35 hours, they get paid. So I don't really have them, I don't have that budget anywhere.
But the comp time is budgeted in other budgets, correct?
Other city budgets, overtime is budgeted, and my budget is not. Why? That's probably a good question. Maybe I should budget it, I don't know.
So is this the only place that this happens, or is there other places that?
In my budget?
Uh-huh.
No, that's the only place that
So
happens.
this person right here, the only half-time,
Correct,
comp time goes to other.
right.
Thank you.
Ms. Mealy.
So that is not, hang on a second, I apologize, just looking back. That does not happen in, say, the vehicle operations budget, like your drivers don't get comp time?
No, they get regular overtime.
Okay.
So in that number, I estimate what is a reasonable amount of overtime. And so there is something budgeted in the total salary line item.
Got it.
But my budget does not have separate overtime
Right. Got
line items, never has.
it. Okay.
We don't know exactly what we pay to overtime then?
It's not shown in the budget. I can break that out for you, for example, what the overtime was for this year, any year. If you'd like to see that. Typically, I like to keep it between 5 and 10%. But I've never shown it in my budget. It's a separate line item like the other departments.
For overtime and comp time. And that salary, that comp time went to, where did you say? I'm sorry. Other, like the drivers and stuff, is that where that went?
What, the additional money in that particular line item, or?
Yeah. You said the comp time for like drivers?
Well, no, they're in their line item, the 1,800,000 and whatever it is, includes money for overtime.
Right. I mean, the program and project coordinator.
That goes, well, anything that's left over would go towards comp time for any of those employees under the planning budget, because they're all, the only exempt person is myself. Every other employee either makes overtime or comp time. So unfortunately, that's the reality of the way the law is in terms of Fair Labor Standards Act.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm just trying to understand.
And I think that, again, probably the challenge every year is, one, we start with yours, and maybe you should change that. But we start with yours, but it's also, we're much more comfortable working our way through the structure of the cities, because we deal with that on a day-to-day basis. And, comp time's broken out different.
Police shows both overtime and comp time.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they can bank it.
Right.
In my particular, I don't allow any employee to bank comp time in my department.
And then the other
Because you
thing that's
pay out-
broken out is the departments are broken down, obviously in more than 3. And so it's easier to track that. And so the differences are, I think, where a lot of these questions are coming from. If there
I
are,
just don't think this our philosophy in budgeting is never to show overtime. I mean, you budget a small number for overtime, but, I don't want to make it a given in a particular budget. I mean, you should try to limit your overtime as much as possible. And
Sure.
so that's why we've always tried to show it as just salary and keep within that and not separate it out from salary where you have an overtime budget. I think it should be managed as one budget.
it's an overall personnel expense. And if for some reason you have a high overtime, it's probably going to be paid for by having open positions or something over the course of a year.
Correct. I mean, a budget in our particular case, and I think in any case, is that just because a budget is adopted now doesn't mean you don't have to be managing your budget. So, we have a fixed amount of revenue. In our particular case, we're budgeting revenue and expenses. Every other department is just expenses.
Right.
And whatever happens, happens. That's why, we have to manage both revenues and expenses, and we're responsible for bringing revenues in to pay for our budget. So, if a particular line item goes over, we can't just go to the general fund and ask for additional money. We have to try to find it within our budget and the particular revenues that we get in a particular year. I mean, so, out of almost $7.5 million, we're responsible for bringing about 7.2 of that. So, I mean, it's sort of scary, you've got to contain it, and you can't just go wild with overtime or whatever, because there's no money there to do anything. Some positions are part-time instead of full-time, then you have some savings there that work as a contingency, but, there's not that many situations like that in our budget.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to page 7 then.
Just had one more.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Allison and Mrs. Katz.
Mr. Nichols, you mentioned the reorganization within the planning, Office of Planning, and you talked about the business compliance manager and the
Right.
procurement manager.
Right.
And Are they the same people that were in the, they were previously positions called facilities coordinator, manager, and assistant facilities coordinator?
Yes, that was, we used to have John Markley and Bill Wright in my budget. So when that situation changed,
Right.
those positions I'm utilizing for the shared ride program, because we're required to have a manager of our shared ride program.
Right.
And the other position is actually a shared position, again, with the city. You'll see that, if you remember, we budgeted some money in the city budget for a procurement person. It's being budgeted in my budget as well as the city budget.
Okay.
So you will, I will, so some of that, we're going to recoup some of those dollars into our budget because of the shared position with the city. So there'll be some savings there for my budget as well.
Okay.
So that's, you know, that's some extra contingency money, but obviously we'll have available if we need it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz.
One is a statement and one is a question. I find it interesting that you don't allow them to bank overtime. That's really interesting. You know, because
Well,
a
if you
lot-
carry it over, then, you know, it becomes more expensive in the next year because hours go up. And so if it happens, then it's paid out within a particular pay period. So it's not encumbered, adds to your balance sheet or takes away from your balance sheet and becomes more expensive as years go on. So no, we don't allow banking of any comp time.
The question I have is, with John Markley and Bill Wright no longer working, well, Bill Wright is on a back temporary.
It's not in my budget, though.
He's not in your budget,
No.
okay. There are no shared incomes then left anymore?
Shared, I'm sorry?
Well, they were part of their salaries are paid by the city,
Right,
and part by you.
right.
There
So
are
there's no relationship like that now.
It's all over and done with now?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now are we ready? I think so. So we're on to Trade and Transit, Peter Hurdick, Museum budget.
Projected revenues, again, lease rental income from various tenants, from Church Street, CTL Uptown, parking in 3rd Street and Midtown, fees that we get, admission fees from the museum, $5,000, or I'm sorry, $10,000. Donations or grants, $10,000, primarily from the Visitors Bureau. Interest income, $1,000. Transfer from WBTs, $600,000. Program income, $450,000. As we said, that's parking revenue from Church Street and dollars from the county, CNG, and other income that mostly is applied to debt service. Under projected expenditures, our salaries, $225,000. We have FICA life insurance and health insurance, purchase of services, $250,000. That's all the electric, cleaning, gas, water, et cetera, that comes under that. Supplies and materials, $50,000, contingency, $2,500, debt service, $650,000, and expenses related to the museum, $49,000, for a total of $1,281,000.
Comments or questions? One of the things I remember you talking about for a long time was for the Hurdick Museum, you balanced out the donations for exhibits with the expenses so that if you didn't get the donations, you wouldn't expand the exhibits. This year, it looks like you didn't get donations, but you expended money on exhibits. Maybe it was absolutely necessary.
It's recommended by the auditor. We just accounted for it differently. We kept the expenses separate from the other parts of the budget. And so all the expenses, electric and those type of things are in that particular line item. Include the part-time person who, temp that works, behind the desk. So all the expenses associated with operating the museum go there.
Oh, okay. And so the idea then for 2018 is if we get $10,000, we'll put $10,000 into new exhibits, but otherwise the budget for running the Transportation Museum is $39,000 more or less?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been very difficult. I mean, I don't think our mission is to try to go out and get grants and compete with the other museums, I think what we have and what we maintain. We did a restoration of the rail car this year. You know, it's just to, you know, update some exhibits, but in terms of major exhibits, I just don't think that's in the cards to do.
Anything else on this page?
Oh, we did, but I think what we're trying to do is work with the Tabor. We just got a car, and it was in the paper, I forget the 1930-something, beautiful car, Studebaker or something. It's down in the museum, so working with the Tabor, that was donated to them, but it's being placed in, it is in our museum, and it's a great addition, so I think that's the route to go, is work with the Tabor Museum for additional exhibits.
Good idea. Mr. Slaughter.
Supplies and materials came in significantly higher.
Supplies and materials, well, we have additional facility, trade and transit too, is primarily the reason for it. We just, you know, extra salt, you know, whatever they need to, landscaping, you know, whatever. I just, again, we didn't really compensate for adding a major facility to our inventory in terms of the budget in 2017. It was opened in late 2016, so we had 2017, you have a whole area of, doubled the area for our bus bays and other maintenance items, so again, the additional supplies and materials related to that.
All right, if there are no further questions, we'll move on to capital projects.
Again, our capital projects, 2017 actual estimate relates to actual receipts from grants. May or may not have been projects that were approved in the 2017 budget, but we always reflect what we received in terms of ongoing grants and activities. As far as 2018, federal share $1,920,000, state share $6,862,288. Local match $112,712. Local match county $100,000. Total is $8,995,000. And then under projects, same amount at $8,995,000. 80% that's new buses that we have on order or will order. We have a pending grant request into the state for another 4 buses, so potentially we could be 12 buses, and that would pretty much finish at least 95% of where we need to be to the conversion to CNG. So there is some facility upgrade money in there, and again, we've not heard, we're not sure. Because of state budget impasse and the delay, we don't really know what projects we're going to be able to pursue, but that is sort of what we hope to get for 2018. But it's primary buses.
Comments or questions? Ms. Mealy.
Just a funny little question, Mr. Nichols, it just occurred to me. Why do some items in the budget not have numbers and most of them do? Is there a reason for that? There are 3 in this case, local match, streetscape match, and streetscape capital projects that don't have an associated line item number. But it's...
Well, we didn't budget, I mean, we still show the line items because there was something budgeted for the previous year, but
Got it.
as far as, we don't foresee, the 3rd Street project is budgeted in the city budget.
Yep.
So we don't see much in terms of RBT sponsoring any streetscape. Whatever we do is budgeted in the city side. And so we've always been trying to pursue streetscape as part of any kind of a facility project. So we budget it in our particular budget, but there's nothing really that we can pursue for streetscape.
I mean over on the far, over on the far left side. Why don't they have corresponding sort of identifying numbers for various and sundry
You mean from the
line items?
budget?
Yeah.
Because we didn't receive any funds. The actual estimate, again, are funds that we received, which may not relate to any
I'm
particular.
not using the right terminology. This number.
Oh,
An accounting
she's talking
number.
about account numbers related to local match, streetscape
Oh.
match, et cetera.
Sorry, I'm going to claim baby brand on this one. I was not thinking about the terminology.
Because we put it all in one line item, 87030 is all
Got
accounted
it.
for, one
So it-
expense line item, so we don't have separate line item. It's all projects that RVT relate are in that one line item.
Got it. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah, I was not explaining myself well, I apologize. I had just asked Jonathan the same question, and he explained it the same way that you did. Okay, got it.
Any other comments on capital projects budget? Questions? Hearing none, that brings us to the end of that section. Now we move to income estimates, which are page 4 through 6. Sticking with us, Mr. Nichols?
starting on page 4 of the budget.
Yes.
First line item is real estate current. And for 2018, the proposed budget amount is $12,865,169. And this amount is determined by the calculation on the first page in your miscellaneous section of your budget book. You'll see that this page shows that the market value of Williamsport taxable real estate, and this is information provided by the county, is $956,105,930. The assessed value ratio remains at 100%. Therefore, applying the proposed real estate tax rate of 14.72 mils, which has not changed from last year, or from 2017, generates real estate tax revenue of $14,073,879. To get to the budget amount, we subtract the estimated LRTA abatements of $90,000 and apply a collection rate of 92%. And then this gives you the number of $12,865,169 as indicated on the first line of the income estimate budget. Okay. Real estate prior is $825,000, wage tax $2,125,000, local services tax $1,075,000, mechanical devices $16,500, business privilege mercantile $2,075,000, mercantile business privilege prior $20,000. I mean, if you look at the actual estimate for 2017, it was $130,000. Thanks to the efforts of Mr. Grimes, he's done a great job getting prior collections. Real estate transfer $200,000, interest and penalties $240,000. Discounts allowed in the the 2% discount period is $250,000. TRAN, which is the tax anticipation note, we are increasing to $2 million for 2018 for total revenues, tax $21,191,669,000. Then we have other categories of revenues, license and permits, TV, cable, franchise, $224,000, other $115,000, which is like plumber licenses, contractor registrations, building permits, $300,000. And talking with Joe Girardi and the codes department, those are his anticipated numbers. For us, construction activities, street excavation permits, $50,000 for a total of $689,000. Then we have fines and forfeits, traffic fines, state, city share $13,000, traffic fines the rest of the institutions, county $35,000. We have traffic fines local $3,000, magistrate fees $95,000 for a total of $146,000.
Comments or questions? A couple that I have, one for Mr. Grimes. I think this is something that you've told me before, but I just wanted to double check on the mercantile and business privilege prior line. Last year we budgeted $120,000. You were very successful in through your auditing process to bring in additional revenue. But I think you told me that you don't anticipate that being an ongoing increase in revenue for that line?
We actually, in 2017, budgeted 20,000 for it. Looks like
Yeah,
we
that's
got
what I meant to say.
And the reason why we really start with $0 there. They're all done through audits. We could find, 10 large contractors that didn't pay in a year. We could find nobody. So
Right.
it's really hard to estimate that. We do have a few that we're working with, but most of the larger payers that we missed in the past, we feel that we've gotten most of those guys. And there are a few that we're working on right now, but we go and do an audit, obviously, just to be sure our records are correct, not assuming that somebody mispaid. And through that process, we could find $200,000, or we could just find that they did pay correctly, and through the information we had, we
didn't see that.
So kind of a steady state, low conservative estimate of 20,000 is safer than going, hey, we found 130,000, we'll find it again next year.
Right, 20,000 is pretty much just doing our due diligence to find a few people that did bigger projects or bigger businesses that we missed in the past, something we could really rely on. And then if we find some bigger ones or a large group of things that we missed, then that can raise that number considerably.
And by the way, we don't mind at all when the revenue line items come in over budget. And then the other one that I wanted to ask about, well, yeah, I think this is the only other one on this page. The tax anticipation note, in fact, I might just defer to Mr. Henderson because he's spoken eloquently on this in the past. It was 2 years ago, we were at $1 million. This year, we were at $1.5 million, and now we're going to $2 million. The debt service, even if it's only a few months, is not nothing. Is this a sign of cash flow problems?
I think it was $1.5 million, then we dropped it down, depending on our ending balance and what we anticipate. In terms of cash flow,
But I think, if I'm right, it was $1 million just a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And it had been $1 million for a
I think
number
it
of
was
years.
well, and I don't think we even came close to using the $1 million, but as the funding, the ending balance gets tighter, then the cash flow is obviously affected before tax receipts come in. So to play it safe, we were pretty close this year, so we felt that we need to increase it just in case.
And so what you're saying is running a tight fund balance costs money in interest?
Well, a little bit of interest. Again, over the years, council's been successful in finding our little niches where we can hide $1 or $2. So since most of those have been discovered, we don't have as much flexibility, in terms of cash flow.
Well, I mean, they could always show up on the bottom of page 1 and a number larger than $120,561, right?
Yep, that's, if you again look at, I should mention that in your miscellaneous section is a 5-year budget comparison and 5-year averages as they relate to the comparative equity statement, budget expenditures, and budget revenues. We seem to be in a 3-year cycle where, we, try to achieve a no tax increase budget, and that impacts the next year or two. So, and then maybe after 3 years, we build up our fund balance, and we actually have a no tax increase budget, because if you look at the assessed market values for city real estate, it's been level. It has not increased. And if you look at the comparison of total revenues, budget for this year compared to what was budget 2017, level, no increase. Well, obviously, you can't sustain that for a period of time because expenses will go up. And that makes cash flow tighter, and that does impact the Tran. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but
No, I
guess
think
if your
that's
question-
all a great explanation.
I mean,
And of course, the other option is to do less, right?
I'm sorry,
To do less.
services? I mean,
Yeah, to provide
yeah,
fewer
absolutely.
services.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Because revenue either comes from economic growth.
Right.
And as you've said, it's been in the last
And-
3 years, it's been flat. Or it comes in the terms of increased revenue in some fashion or another, mostly taxes. Or it comes from borrowing, short-term and long-term borrowing, or it comes from spending less money.
And the city's tried to be creative in terms of increased revenues through the efforts of the treasurer, obviously, and going back and getting mercantile business privilege taxes, refinancing our bonds achieved additional revenue. But, those efforts are only one time, and what you need is sustained economic growth. Similar to our neighboring community who is decreasing real estate taxes because obviously they have enough economic growth that they can decrease taxes, which is sort of hard to
Well,
believe, but
And almost
unfortunately we
no
don't have
services, of
that.
course.
What's that?
And almost no services.
Correct. So I think the administration's been very creative in trying to do everything it can to enhance revenues, but it's just extremely difficult, so.
Mr. Anderson.
About how much interest do we pay for borrowing that $2 million?
That's under an expense line, Joe, I don't know, that would be under the, maybe $3,000-4,000? Joe?
15.
I don't know, I can't recall.
It's on page 24, right?
We're estimating 15. We were a little slow on paying back, and not for tax issues, it was just a oversight. So you'll see it's a little bit higher in 2017 on page 24. But we're expecting to go back down slightly higher than what we've budgeted in the past, but lower than where we ended up this year.
That was 15,000, sorry, that was,
It was 20,000 this year.
You said it was an oversight? That was,
Mr. Slaughter.
We just missed making the payment when we anticipated we would once the tax money started flowing in.
Oh.
So,
So we ended up paying more because we forgot.
Mr. Anderson, any more? Any other comments on page 4? Mr. Ellis.
Yeah, I do have a comment, an observation, I guess. If you look at the over/under in the bottom line there, the 559,000 over, if you subtract the extra 500,000 from the tax anticipation note, we're really 59,000, close to 60,000 over in revenues from last year. So that does show the lack of growth in our basic pot. Rather dramatically, if you go back to the 2017 budget that we had, the bottom line there was 79,000. So that wasn't 79,000 increase over in the revenues. So it's getting tighter, and the mercantile and business privilege tax prior that year came in at 230,000 over a $50,000 budget. So that was a big boost, but that boost is getting smaller now as more and more have been identified. So the revenue side is really tightening up. And we know that moving forward, that's unless we experience some kind of economic boom that we're not anticipating, we're pretty much squeezing every area. And I just think, I know it's been painful for council over the past few years, several years, to look at tax increases. And I know we're at the limit locally, and I'm thankful we don't have one this year. But we took the lead on that. Had we not done that, Mr. Nichols, you would have an estimate or maybe an idea, without those tax increases, what kind of shape would we be in at this point?
it would be multi-million-dollar issue. And if you remember, I handed out something of interest that was just in terms of the philosophy of tax increases. You know, obviously no one wants them, but you know, during a 10-year period, I showed where if you increase taxes $250,000 for those 10 years, we'd be 20% lower in our real estate tax and have a surplus of, you know, whatever it is. But right now, the way we seem to be budgeting is, you know, we try to be conservative, up to 3% in revenues and expenses. And so we're sort of able to manage a budget where after a couple years, we have a substantial fund balance again. But then we go with a no tax increase budget, which is needed, obviously, but then that sets the stage for difficult times over the next 2 years. So I still, again, it's not very popular, and is that We should be trying a small tax increase every year, and we'd actually be, I think, in better shape by doing that. But, you know, there's a compounding effect. You know, really you are paying more because of those small increases, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but
Well-
again, we're now in a position because of the way we're budgeting is now we can present a no tax increase budget. Difficult. New revenues have been found. The mayor's, you know, tried to find everything he can and keep expenses low. So we're able to achieve a no tax increase budget with market values down a little bit and no additional revenues other than what we talked about. So it's pretty remarkable that we can do that, but, you know, it's a one-year reprieve, so to speak.
And I appreciate that explanation because from my point of view, and I'm certainly not in favor of a tax increase this year, and I'm glad we don't have one, but we can't go back we can't redo the past. It's unfortunate that that path wasn't taken, because what it's left us with is, as you said, a year with no tax increases. Then we have to make up. You have to make it up somehow. And we've had to do some make some very, very tough decisions about raising taxes, as opposed, the only other opportunity there is to reduce services. And the only way to do that is by reducing personnel, because that's where the money is. It's a conundrum that every government faces, every level of government. So, and we didn't do that, so now we're faced with these kinds of things. And we don't have one this year, but, and we don't want to have one next year, but as this budget has shown us the shrinking amount of increase every year in the revenues that are brought in, we're basically flatlining as expenses go up. And you come to a place where you can't make ends meet anymore, and you can't raise taxes anymore. And at some point, if things don't change, I guess what I'm saying is we need planning, not just for this year, but for 5 years down the road. We need to have an idea of where we're going to be financially and be able to, if we'd have done that 5 years ago, or even longer, we'd be way ahead of the game now. But it's never too late to start.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, and it seems like we're a broken record. We've talked about that for a long, long time. One of the things to point out, you pointed out $60,000 in increased revenue from taxes without a tax increase. So that's the change. And you said, you know, others have said, you said, you know, if we had economic boom, you know, that would help to generate more revenue. But if I remember correctly, and Joe or Bill, you might be able to help refresh my memory, in our best years, when natural gas development was booming, the wage tax and the business privilege and mercantile tax, those increased by about, I think it was $300,000 or $400,000, somewhere in that range, combined, those three taxes. Well, I just did a quick math, and our salaries in public safety, fire, police, and codes, this year, just salaries, not counting benefits or any other expenses, just salaries in just those three departments, which are big numbers. I mean, that's a big, probably the single biggest share of anything in our budget. Those went up by $400,000. So that doesn't count costs of vehicles increasing, costs of lights increasing, whatever. So just salaries in some of our most important departments went up by $400,000. And what that means is even in boom times, economic growth doesn't keep up with your expenses. You know, there's something flawed with our, and by the way, I don't think the city's unique. I think this is facing communities all over the country. But there's something flawed with our model, our economic model for providing for the cost of governance. When, as a community, we have a certain expectation of services. I have a certain expectation of services that I want as a citizen in the community. But we can't afford that level of service, either by paying, because the costs go up too fast, and we can't control how much those costs come up. And so, as you said, at some point, we can't afford to pay more. You know, we'll disagree when that is, but at some point, it just is not feasible to raise taxes beyond a particular point, and I'm glad that this budget doesn't do that. It doesn't necessarily put us in a healthy situation, as Mr. Nichols suggested, but it doesn't raise taxes. But regardless, at some point, we won't be able to afford what we've been trying to afford in terms of the level of services. And at that point, we're going to have to do less unless the economic model changes, and that's outside of our control. And so we can decide to do less either in a planned, ahead, deliberate kind of way, or we can say, oh, this person retired, we'll cut the position, without that being part of an overarching plan. Or we're desperate this year, and so we're going to have cuts or layoffs or whatever. But with good, 3-5 year planning, we can figure out how do we maintain as much as we can, but do it in a way that doesn't hurt the service, that what people have come to expect in terms of services in a drastic way all at once, but also doesn't lead to a massive increase in costs that leads to having taxes higher than people can afford. And either it puts individuals in a very difficult financial position, or they vote with their feet. And in a city that used to be 52,000 and is now 30,000, maybe they have less than 30,000 already voted with their feet. And so this, as a budget, this is a pretty good looking budget if you take it in isolation. But within that broader context, I think it's important to deal with some of those difficult questions in the good years, in the relatively good years, because they're only harder to deal with in the years that these numbers look much worse. Other questions, comments? Ms. Mealy?
But we make it infinitely harder on both ourselves and our citizens when we insist on not raising taxes one year and then raising them by $1 million the year after that.
Yeah.
We make it harder to budget for anybody out there who, whether they own an apartment, whether they rent an apartment, whether they own a house, whether they own a business, to not know year over year whether your tax bill is going to be dramatically higher than it was the last year. And we make it harder for ourselves because, as Mr. Nichols observed, slow but steady tax increases, small but steady tax increases, increase our bottom line in a reliable way that we can then budget for moving forward. So I would call it irresponsible, frankly, on all of our parts, to pretend that we're not aware of that and to pretend that we are doing a service to the citizens by offering them a no tax increase budget when we know that we're only going to have to hit things harder next year to make up for it, and that our bottom line is going to be weaker when we do. But I would also say that, we're making a handful of perhaps poor decisions in this budget. When we look at, we're taking a 2% health decrease this year. We're also banking on a Benecon return because we didn't do it last year, which means that we're liable to be, about $1 million in the hole next year when we do not have a Benecon return, and we've also decreased our taxes, our healthcare budget, and then we will increase it next year. Unless, of course, some miracle occurs and our healthcare costs go down again. But,
Everything, it's hard to predict. You've got, three major pensions, healthcare, and wages. That's
Right.
80% of your budget. So, we got to continue to negotiate reasonable contracts. I think with this year in pensions and the investment returns, I think are going to pay dividends, I'm hoping, and we're trying to get the employees to adopt the hybrid plan, which is not an immediate relief, but is something that will achieve tremendous savings over, the out years, whatever that is. And then, healthcare, I'm just hoping that,
Disappears.
I'm just hoping for a good, I'm just hoping everything, we have 2 years of everything falling into place.
I guess that what I'm saying is, and all of us sound like doomsday prophets, and to a certain extent we are, but the larger point is that we have been making certain decisions, like the concept of trying to move to a hybrid plan for some of our unions, we've been making certain decisions with a long term in mind, but all of those decisions bear fruit 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Meanwhile, to put it plainly, we're screwing ourselves year over year by continually spending down our fund balance, and we're screwing our citizens. And I think it's something that we really need to think about hard as we move forward. Dr. Williamson is right that people have been voting with their feet. I don't see any reason why they need to. I'm proud of our community, and I'm proud of what we have to offer. However, we need, clearly we can only advocate so much on a state level for policies that will put us in a stronger fiscal position versus some of our neighboring municipalities that have been benefiting from state services for a long time. However, we need to be tackling this not just at budget time and talking about it not just at budget time, but tackling it all year. Why? What is it that puts? How do we recruit new businesses to the city? How do we increase our real estate values? How do we work on things like this? It's a difficult situation. It may be an impossible situation, but we're not making anything better by bemoaning it without attempting to deal with it year-round and look at the issues that face us year-round. And I would call on all of us, council and the administration, to begin discussing this on a more regular basis and looking to things that will add to our bottom line. Hey, maybe it's only $400,000. Hell, maybe it's only $100,000. But it makes a little bit more sense than waiting until November and complaining every year. Sorry, maybe I'm having a bit of a day today. And then forgetting about it again until next November. Thank you.
Well, East 3rd Street, that's our next economic development corridor, and the Park Avenue study.
Yeah.
A Wegmans, return on that is, to the city, is well over $100,000 a year. So
Right.
we got to find more of those type of developments.
We have, we have a lot of really wonderful things in our community, and we are building on those things, and we are working on those things, and all of that takes time. But my fear is that we're also undermining a lot of our just sort of basic abilities by not budgeting looking to the future, and we're going to wind up not having the resources to execute a lot of the really great things that we're hoping to pull off because we have allowed ourselves to get down to this very narrow budget window that doesn't give us any room for anything that we might want to accomplish. And I think that we all need to be talking about that all the time. But thank you.
Mr. Allison.
Just one other item, the TV cable franchise, and talking about thinking ahead. I know it's not going to come up for, another 5?
Probably 5 or less years. I remember the last time.
When we negotiate that, do we know what other similar communities are getting, or do they have a standard template that they, do they bargain?
There's a maximum, but we're not at the maximum.
Okay.
One thing that was problematic the last time around is that they said that you really don't want to increase it because we're going to show it on the bill as a separate line item. I think it sort of intimidated everybody by saying that. If you look at your bill, there is a line item that is a cable franchise fee. I'm not sure exactly how they list it, but it's there. So, but I think there is a limit, but we're not at that limit.
So they apply that franchise fee individually to different communities or areas?
Yes. Right?
Customers.
Yeah.
What it is, when we negotiated with the cable company, the first go-round of negotiations the cable company took the position, we don't care what you charge, and I think you're allowed to charge, generally it was between 3% and 5%. Ours is 3%. All they asked was that all the municipalities within this area, please charge the same rate. That way, they don't have to look at their billing to determine with the Williamsport address, are they in the city of Williamsport, are they in Loyalsock? Since then, they've taken the position with the computers now, they can determine which municipality. And they really didn't stress the requirement that it be uniform. But the negotiators took the position, let's keep it uniform. I was on the team that was doing the negotiation, representing the city's interest, and there was one or two people from each municipality. But they took the position that they do not absorb the cost of the franchise fee. It's passed directly on to the customer, and whether it's 3%, 4%, 5%, it's on your bill, the franchise fee.
Okay.
The city was going to raise it to 4% or 5%. They would just pass the cost on to the customer.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Schlatter?
I just want, how much extra did we pay on the tax by missing it? I just wanted to make a note. $5,000 extra.
Brings us to page 5.
Under interest received, $5,000. Tax investment income, $200, for a total of $5,200. Departmental earnings and direct costs, RVT, $75,000. Recreation program income, $20,000. Pool admissions, $35,000. Pool concessions, $1,000. Then there are towing fees at $15,000. Rental inspections, $40,000. Special events, $30,000, miscellaneous income, workers' comp, $10,000, miscellaneous income codes, $2,000, controller, $100, finance, $90,000. But keep in mind, that still includes the reimbursement for certain expenses from the Water and Sanitary Authority. So that needs to be in the discussion in terms of, what costs that they will pick up. Mostly related to the pump stations, the electrical costs, the salaries, from public services dedicated to maintaining pump stations. So that's, I guess, would be considered an open item. Miscellaneous income, fire, $5,000, police, $60,000, streets and parks, $2,500, treasurer, $9,000, surplus properties, sales through propertyroom.com, $7,500. Bowmanfield naming rights, $30,000. Benecon health insurance surplus, $400,000, for a total of $832,100 on departmental earnings.
Questions? Ms. Mealy?
Just a quick and very small question. So we made $34,500 at the pool this year, and we're budgeting $35,000 for next year. Do we have a reason why we suspect that revenue will increase? Because my understanding is that revenue actually decreases year over year, since we're not making any new, we're not adding anything new to the pool. It would seem unreasonable to think that we would make more money. I mean, it's a matter of a couple $1,000. I'm just asking because I don't know if we have plans there that I don't know about.
No, nothing new that I'm aware of, but I think we should be able to sustain with, still, it's a fairly new pool with pretty neat attractions that, 35, I think, is of course, it's weather-based too, so.
Yeah.
But
And
my
based on
forecast
how
tells
long
me
the
it's going to
pool's
be a
open.
tremendous summer.
And that's Farmer's Almanac. We got it out and we consulted it and said, all right, next year looks way better than this year. I mean, I know that we did give out a bunch of free passes last year, was my understanding, and perhaps if we curtail a bit of that, then we might manage to see a little more revenue, but it is hard to say.
Not
Depends.
aware of that. I
Okay.
don't know.
But I think that was, and we are anticipating a Benecon surplus in this upcoming calendar year that would relate to a surplus basically from 2017, correct? But,
Yes.
but then my assumption would be that, given that we're lowering our healthcare insurance cost across the board by 2%, we would not anticipate another $400,000 surplus next year, correct?
I would hope that we could achieve the same return that we got this year, but I think your probably thought process is probably more accurate, but, you know, I hope it's better than what we budget.
And we did only get a $550,000 surplus this year. For some reason, I was under the
It
impression.
was more than that. Remember, we transferred 600,000
Yeah.
into the capital budget for,
Yeah.
like Cumming Supply and Bowman Field,
Yeah.
this sort of advance
So that's,
funding
so
for
it's,
certain things.
so it's not showing up here because we've already transferred it.
Remember, the 1.5 million we got,
Right.
physically got this year represents 2016's return, so that was included in 2016's number. So this is what we expect to receive in 2000, the 550 is what we expect to receive in 2018, which
Or
represents
2017.
the
Okay.
surplus from 2017. We always receive
550s,
it the
okay.
following year.
But you book it in the budget
The year
that's
that it
already
represents.
closed.
Got it.
So you're anticipating the $400,000 surplus in 2019.
Right, got it. Yes, Joe, that is consistently hard for me to remember. I can't imagine why. But thank you for the explanation. Nope, that's everything.
Ms. Katz?
I want to talk about special events. It was budgeted that we would bring in 40,000, we brought in 31,000, which is less than what was anticipated. Is there a breakdown on where this came from, first of all?
We could probably put something together, but you'll also notice on the expense side, we came in expenditure-wise $10,000 under what we were budgeted to spend. So we've maintained that same $10,000 surplus, essentially, for the or for the special event programs.
Somehow it gets very frustrating with special events of what we bring in and the cost factor of what it costs to put these events on. And it is very frustrating at times. Because some of the salary was put into effect that more money would be brought in with the rec director's salary to justify the special events.
But that's
and
why
this
we-
didn't do it.
But that's why we've also decreased both numbers by $10,000.
But that isn't what the salary was based on with the rec director for the special events. That's what was
But we've
discussed last
maintained
year.
the same margin that we were representing that we would maintain with that last year.
We weren't supposed to maintain, we were supposed to increase, and it didn't happen. So I'm questioning this.
Because the revenue was anticipated at 40,000, expenditures were estimated at
The
30.
revenue really should have been 50,000, because that's what was discussed, and and I don't have my book with me from last year. But it was discussed at 50,000, and that to justify the salary because of that, what they were going to bring in for special events. And obviously, you're trying to say that it
Well,
balances.
no, last year, the special event revenue went from $30,000 to $40,000.
Okay, then it didn't justify it.
Mrs. Katz, I looked at my notes on this in particular. The proposed budget for last year, if I remember this part correctly, was basically 30,000 in, 30,000 out. And what council challenged the administration to do is say, we need to subsidize and this is exactly what you're saying, we need to subsidize the recreation director's salary out of excess revenue over expenses. And we settled upon in our budgeting and talking to the rec director of a $10,000 subsidy towards essentially the administration of the whole rec department, i.e. our salary. But the choice of 40,000 of revenue and 30,000 of expenses was somewhat arbitrary given that she was new. And she achieved 31,000 of revenue this year, and the expense, are you on that page by any chance?
From last year?
No, from this year.
Oh, yes.
Recreation, special events, expenses were 20,000. So she achieved an $11,000 profit that could then subsidize the administration of the whole department, exceeding what we anticipated, even though the level of revenue in and expenses out were a bit lower. The subsidy was what we asked for. And then what Mr. Pavlik is saying is their proposal is to change the revenue expense to match what occurred last year. But the key is the subsidy, the profit of $10,000 is what's maintained to help subsidize the rest of the cost of the department, the rec department, i.e. her salary. So it's keeping the subsidy the same, but turning revenue and expenses in line with actual dollars. Now, clearly, we would love her to subsidize her salary even more, without driving up cost. Bring in more revenue without driving up costs, so that it would subsidize even more. But she did accomplish the goal we set out for a year ago.
I think there was money that was wasted on some of the special events. And I think this is the thing that I'm challenging, is that there's got to be better, we're trying to, for taxpayers' purposes, we're trying to make sure we are not wasting their money on things. And, you know, special events can be very important to our community and everything, but we just want to make sure that it's profitable, that it's not going to be taking out of taxpayers' money. And sometimes, I think some of these special events are not profitable, and they are a waste of money. And I think we should, you know, keep our eye on these situations, okay?
And
I think maybe that her more, what you're saying, the 10,000 could have been more.
Sure.
Instead of what it is.
Sure. And I think your suggestion of getting a breakdown on revenue and expense by event is a good idea. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I would be glad to provide that information, and then I personally believe that the representatives of City Council on Recreation should take a look at that and give us some feedback on what events you think that are profitable, not only profitable, but of course beneficial to the city. And if there's a couple events that are just not cutting it, then what we do is we eliminate those events.
There are some events that are not going to bring any kind of revenue in, and we realize that, because, you know, there are things that you do because it's a community event. But other things that you want to do, you want to cover those expenses of the ones that don't cover, you know.
I agree with you 100%. Like, for instance, a Christmas parade. That is vital to our community, especially, you know, we're talking about dollars and cents and how much things cost. We need to provide those quality of life activities, because we have to give the citizens another reason why should you live in Williamsport, and provide those types of things. And if you take a look at the budget is less than 1% in recreation. But definitely, we would like to have that dialogue with the City Council and the Recreation Commission.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you.
I do sit on the Recreation Commission, and we actually have made some of those suggestions. We've taken a look at these, and whether it's because we have a new recreation director and maybe the transition, I don't know, but some of those recommendations that the Recreation Commission did make were not actually followed. And so we're hoping that this year that will take place, because we did make some recommendations as far as a few of the events that we thought just weren't cutting it. So we'll take a look at it again, and we'll make those recommendations again.
And I think that that's the right avenue, but in terms of the information itself on revenue and expenses by event, if you could provide that to all of council, we'd appreciate it. Mr. Allison.
And being not intimately involved with it, I think I'm somewhat confused about special events, because is my understanding not all special events are run through the rec department? But the expenses come from the rec department? Or paid by?
Mr. Anderson.
That is a big question. And there's not a whole lot of answers that we have. Unfortunately, our rec director is not able to be here tonight to answer some of those questions. But
But going forward.
yeah, but we have some of those same questions as well. It's hard to nail that down. I think an itemization of this particular fund will really help to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 5? Mr.
I
Slaughter.
was just wondering, could we also get a breakdown from the streets and parks? I see they made, 26.5 there.
On miscellaneous income, streets and parks?
That's a good number.
Mr. Nichols?
I forget, Joe, what was the additional?
There was a reimbursement grant.
Oh, yes,
that
for
we
the
got this year,
storm-
so
storm
that's a
damage.
non-recurring item, so.
We don't want another storm, but
Anything else on this page? Page 6, please.
Grant State beverage license tax, $20,000. These are license fees, including fines. Public utility tax, $19,000. Pension contribution from the state, Act 205 driven, $1,075,000, a total of $1,114,000. In lieu of taxes, $358,000. Administration tax collection office, $31,500. SRO grant, local match, school resource officer, $48,000. County liquid fuels allocation, $23,543, for a total of other grants, $461,043. Other contributions, $20,000 from community development, and that's the total of other, for a total income general fund, $24,459,012.
Before I ask for questions, in lieu of taxes, normally there's a summary page. I didn't find one in my packet.
there hasn't been for a couple of years.
Can we get that generated?
We can get that.
Thank you very much. Other comments or questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Nichols.
Okay.
Next item is General Government Mayor's Office, page 12.
Good evening, Dr. President, Mr. Vice President, members of City Council. Before I go over this, may I make a couple comments in regards to dollars and cents conversation that you had?
Sure.
Because I found it very engaging. Personally, and this is my opinion on it, I think some of the issues that we've had in this city, of course, as Ms. Mealy spoke about, has been really out of our hands. Our hands are basically tied. It is what it is for the most part. When we talk about budgeting, and Mr. Nichols and I have spoken about this, in this current structure that we have, the numbers really do not change from year to year. You take a look at your health care, you take a look at the amount of employees you have, unions, et cetera. I personally believe that Pennsylvania is not business-friendly enough. If you take a look at the corporate net income tax, there's been some discussions about taking a look at a sales tax. I personally think they need to maybe start all over again with the tax structure in Pennsylvania. It's out of our hands, okay? But I believe the state can do a lot more with Act 111, arbitration, to help cities. So basically, I'm calling on our state legislators right now to make some tough decisions to help our cities, especially when you talk about state police. It's very, very difficult, and this is one of the reasons why you notice in your budget, and we'll discuss this Wednesday night, about an economic development marketing person. I mean, you have Loyalsock Township, they're cutting their taxes. They have a newsletter. We don't. We have to sell this city. And like you said, we are planning, we have East 3rd Street and Park Avenue, but we have to do more because, in my view as mayor, we're at a breaking point. One of the reasons why we submitted this type of budget, and we'll get to this a little bit later on, but we are multitasking. For the first time ever, our engineer is going to serve as the Assistant General Manager of Streets and Parks. And I have full confidence in her that she can do this. We had Mr. Grado that served 3 positions. I have a lot of confidence in you that you can get the job done. But I believe business does that. You multitask to be able to provide the service that you need to save dollars. But what we need to do is, I personally believe that we really have to grow this economy. Because, once again, as I was about to state, is that when I was preparing this budget, I had several phone calls from elderly people. Now, we're talking about ladies that are about 85 to 90 years old. And it really touches your heart when they say, please don't raise my taxes. I'm going to lose my home. And emotionally, that does impact you as a public servant. So I appreciate the comments in regards to planning for the future. I believe we're doing that. If you're talking about planning on telling the taxpayers we're going to increase your taxes $250,000 every year, I think that's going to hurt us. You know, it might sound good textbook-wise, but personally, I think we're at a breaking point, and I believe all of us are very, very frustrated because we are flat when it comes with income. We're also flat if you take a look at selling a home in this city. The prices of homes have not grown like all of us would like to see them do if you're going to sell your home. You go to Loyalsock Township in Montoursville, you just have to speak to the realtors there. So it is a challenge that we're all going through. We welcome any other suggestions through City Council. We've tried with the naming rights, and of course, we tried to look at some maybe monies from the Water Authority, and of course, refinancing our bonds. We're trying to do the best we can, and we're reaching out to other mayors. And I'm talking to other mayors, and believe it or not, even though it seems grim here, it's a lot more grimmer in other communities with their taxes that continue to raise $1 million every year. And they're losing their businesses, and that's what's so important. If we want to grow this economy, we're going to have to keep our taxes as manageable as possible.
Mayor,
Yes, and I'm
ask
gonna
a
get
question, interject just on
Sure,
that point.
sure.
I'm with you. One of our big problems is our taxes are 14.72 mils, and our neighbors, because they provide no services, or whatever it is, $0.5 mil. And so if you want to be in Lycoming County, and you haven't figured out that the best place to live in Lycoming County is the city of Williamsport, then and you're just looking at tax rates, you live there. So there's another approach, of course, if raising taxes aren't high enough, and it's, you know, the budget proposal that you've given us has a $2.1 million deficit, right? In other words, we bring in $24.459 million, $24.4 million, and we're going to be spending $26.6 million.
It's a balanced budget.
No, it's a $2 million deficit.
Right.
We start with the budget, I'm reading from your page 1. We start with $2.3 million in the bank, and we end with $120,000 in the bank. But that's a deficit. When you spend more than you bring in, it's a deficit. A balanced budget would be you bring in $24 million and you spend $24 million, and you start with the same amount of money in the savings account as you end in the savings account. I mean, that's textbook definition of what a deficit is. And so one way to solve the problem, of course, and deal with increasing expenses is to raise taxes. And we've talked a lot about ways to deal with that or ways to avoid that issue. But the other way to do it is to simply spend less money. Right now we're spending more money than we bring in. And so if we do that next year, there will be a tax increase, or we will have drastic cuts in spending, much more drastic than if you spread out cuts in spending. I mean, it's just the flip side of the tax increase argument.
Or somehow, economically, we have a big boom.
Okay, and so
there's three choices.
how do we do that in 1 year more than we ever have before, given it was a $400,000 increase when we had a big boom in 2011, 2012?
And we're going to need $4 million next year.
And we'll need,
That's everybody's, that's all of ours, that's the big question.
Yeah, it is.
Isn't it?
It's
Isn't it?
impossible is the
For
answer.
all of us, for all of us.
It's impossible to bring in $4 million in taxes related to economic development when we generate, well, $21 million. That would be a 25% increase in
That's,
real estate value and wages and employment and business activity, and that would be, well, I don't even think the Soviet Union could claim that they ever accomplished that when they were booking the numbers back in the Cold War. So we, as a result, sure, I'm with you. Let's grow the economy. Let's make this place more desirable and have more people live here with higher property values and more jobs, all of those things. But it's not going to balance the books. We have a $2 million deficit that will become a $4 million hole next year. We either are going to have to raise taxes, which I'm not for either, or we're going to have to cut spending.
By a quarter of our budget,
Yeah.
or, sorry, 15%.
All the more reason for a 5-year plan starting like today.
Yes. Okay, I think you were finished with what you were
Yes,
going to say,
I'm
so you can go back to page 12.
okay. Salaries, mayor's office, personnel services, $97,245. FICA, $7,500. Life insurance, $390. Workman's comp, $65. Pensions, $13,500. Healthcare, $24,200. Total personnel services, $142,900. Purchase of services, travel economic development, 0. Hearings and litigation, $75,000. Office rent, $36,100. Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, go ahead and finish up the page.
SPCA, $28,000. Historical Society, $1,000. Citizens Corps, $1,000. Newberry Community Partnership, $2,000. Victorian Christmas, $1,000. General Office Supplies, $3,500. Support equipment, $1,300, and that's in regards to copy machines. Total expenses, $291,800. And if you notice, our budget for 2017 was $291,183.
Comments or questions? Do you happen to remember the details of why hearings and litigation went over budget this year?
Mr. Nichols?
Union grievances related to the police department that they're trying to settle and sort out. So the Labor Council, also finalizing the details of a settlement with the RACB grant for the William Street redevelopment project.
Okay. But I know that, you can't control, in the short term anyway, that expense. So I was just wanting to make sure I remembered all the details there. Other comments or questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
One other comment I'd like to make is, when you take a look at this budget from year to year, and as you said earlier, we may have to take a look at some cuts, but here's the problem. We have contracts. We have contracts, and the most expensive area is public safety. Starts with the police department. So in regards to this issue that we've had for 30 years, drugs, can we afford to lay off police officers, make the city less safer? You have a fire department. Everybody wants a full-time fire department. We've looked at other avenues. Legally, we can't do it. And by contract, we have to have 30. And we want to improve our neighborhoods, and that's the codes department. So it's tough. It's tough being leaders of third-class cities. Everybody's going through it. But I welcome these discussions anytime. Thank you.
Those are the challenges. Next is Department of Streets and Parks. Good evening.
Good evening, members of council. Administrative Streets and Parks, Office of the Director. Personnel Services, salaries,
$166,605. FICA, $12,800. Life insurance, $575. Workers' compensation, $5,700. Pensions, $40,500. Health insurance, $73,000. Total personnel services, $299,180. Purchase of services, training and traveling, $3,850. Office rental, $8,100. Contracted services, $40,000. Supplies and materials, general office supplies, $2,500. Support equipment, $2,500. Telephones, $6,000. Total department expense, $362,130.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Mrs. Katz.
Salaries, how many people, first of all, it's gone down tremendously, okay? First of all, how many personnel are involved in this?
One union member, which would be our office manager, at 3% pay increase for 2018. General manager and the engineer/assistant general manager.
So therefore, compensation is going to be made for the engineer in both her department and
Are you asking what the compensation is?
Right,
And
right, mhm.
it's actually, how much she's gonna get paid? You wanna know that?
Right,
Currently, she's making $57,000, and she's gonna be paid $5,000. She's already doing a lot of those responsibilities as it is, so I think that's a bargain for us. And like I said, we're looking at any type of way to provide services at a lower cost, and that's what we're doing in that position. And of course, Mr. Winder will be making less money than Mr. Wright did. His salary will be very similar to Tom Sillo's when Tom Sillo took the position. So both positions in the last couple of years, we're going to be saving a lot of money.
Is Mr. Wright still on a contract basis right now, or is it over with?
Yeah, he is, but he is slowing down. I've asked Mr. Wright and also Mr. Winder to provide me information on what they have taught and what he has learned, and I'm satisfied that it was a very good decision to prepare him. I have a lot of confidence in Adam that he's going to continue to do a wonderful job.
So Adam is going to be in the position?
Yes, Adam will be the general manager, and the assistant general manager will be Rebecca.
Can we get, by the way, job descriptions for both the general manager position and the new combined position to see how that, especially in the case of the engineer, how her time will be balanced between those two roles?
If I may, Rebecca, could you just briefly state some of the things that you're already doing that's basically you've taken on those responsibilities as it is?
Yeah, I actually have the draft.
Yeah, can you use the microphone, please?
Sorry, I have a cold, so I
It's
just
okay.
I actually have a draft that I had given the engineer position job title to Megan, and then she incorporated with the assistant general manager's position. Some of the responsibility, which includes actually flood control. I have been taking care of all of our outreach to consultants as well as the Army Corps and FEMA, and any information that needs to be sent to the county regarding the levee. You want me to go through
And
it again?
those would have fallen under the assistant general manager prior?
I think they fell under the actual general manager, if I'm correct in saying that, just the
Okay.
way it was passed down.
So we're actually, because of Rebecca's expertise as an engineer in dealing with flooding, et cetera, we felt that it would be in the city's best interest to revise those job descriptions. I mean, why should this gentleman, in my view, have those responsibilities when she's trained to do those things. So we are revamping both those positions. We will be glad to provide you with those job descriptions, and I'm sure you'll be happy with them.
And I actually met, if that's helpful, I met with Megan today, and we are planning to meet on a weekly basis for the next month to go over everything in detail so that she can, I mean, this is just a draft, and that's kind of why she gave it to me today, so that I can look through it, and then we can work collectively. And this is, I think, just a 6-month probation period to see how this works out with having the 2 roles combined and then having 2 positions rather than the 3.
Because and the reason I'm interested in that in particular, and others may have other interests, is of course the job of city engineer is a critical piece of the puzzle for both sort of the day-to-day operations of various aspects of our streets and our flood control system and on all of that, but also connected to things like economic development and those pieces where the job, I'm less familiar with the job of assistant general manager, but I'm imagining that's a very different role in terms of day-to-day supervision of personnel, management of equipment and materials, and finding the right balance of time and energy across what are not naturally compatible tasks in all of the pieces, maybe in some, but not in all the pieces, is a concern.
Right, so that's, oh, go ahead.
Further, how is this going to interfere with you getting your PE? There's a time limit on that, if I remember correctly. Isn't there a time limit? That we as a third-class city have to have a PE engineer?
I think under education experience, it says graduate from college or university. Does it say anything about having a requirement? Okay.
As long as she's working on it and she plans on getting that within a 5-year period, she's okay. Mr. Grado actually did the same thing.
We understand that. I just don't want to, she's working towards that and want to make sure that
Right, to be able to balance out time, right.
And you were going to say something about personnel and equipment management?
Yes, so I'll answer both questions, I guess, if that's okay. So with, like I had said, we are meeting with Megan, myself, and Adam on a weekly basis, and that's where we're going to divvy up the tasks. And right now, the 3 of our plan is to have everything sorted out as to who does specific tasks related for the assistant and the actual manager themselves split apart. And I think the way it looks right now, how we understood it is I would handle more of all of the streets and flood control, where Adam would handle more of the personnel and administration. And I would just kind of be on a more need-to-know basis and help out as needed. That's kind of where we were headed now. Just after talking with Megan today, like I said, and with the PE, I am working toward it. That is my ultimate goal. I guess, let's see, it will take roughly 5 years based upon taking my fundamentals exam and then passing the professional engineer's exam. So that is a balancing act, but I guess for some reassurance, I did manage to make it through a 4-year degree with 2 kids, so I hope that gives you some reassurance that I will manage my time as needed for the city. Yeah, yep.
So you traded your 2 kids in when you got this job? Is that right?
I still have them, so it's still a balancing act.
Just joking. Other comments, questions on page 13? Mr. Allison.
The contracted services.
The contract services is for, well, we use Penn College for what they consider projects of theirs, but we use them to get larger projects done. That covers the material for those projects. For instance, we had a building put up at our site, the American building, or the Butler building, I'm sorry. Penn College actually came in and poured a concrete floor, which was never really planned in as part of the building process. So that was just a requirement, was us to pay for all materials, so that's where the money came from for that.
So that's, traditionally, that wasn't used, that line item wasn't used for those kinds of things.
I think he may be confusing it with the contracted services in another line item.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
This is money set aside for potentially bringing the previous engineer back to assist with some of these projects, closing out some things of that nature. I think we spoke of that in the past, potential for John Gritter to come back for
Yeah,
some
okay.
short period of time.
Because it used to be Mr. Markley. and-
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to run off of Bill's revised notes that he gave me today. Bill writes.
okay. That's fine.
Anything else, or are we ready to move on to page 14? Okay, Parks? And go ahead and run through 14 and 15.
Okay. Parks Department, salaries, $265,438. Overtime, $9,000. FICA, $21,000. Life insurance, $1,200. Workers' comp, $13,800. Pensions, $81,000. Health insurance, $127,500. Total personnel services, $518,938. Purchase of services, heat, $1,250. Tree removal, $1,500. Equipment rental, $500. Brandon Park electric bills, $3,000. Ways Garden electric bills, $325. Bowman Field electric bills, $5,000. Memorial Park electric bills, $700. Young's Woods electric bills, $1,000. Water and sewer, $1,700. Ways Garden Commission, $1,000. Festival of Lights, $2,400. Supplies and materials, gas and oil vehicles, $14,500. Protective clothing, $1,800. Other park material, $15,000. New trees, flowers, shrubs, $1,000. Brandon Park tree maintenance, $900. Equipment, $0. Equipment repairs, vehicle repairs, $6,000. Vehicle to other, repairs to other equipment, $9,000. Other expenditures, Bowman Field improvements, $25,000. Total department expense, $610,513.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Mr. Noviello?
On 62,150 other park material, 17,000 in 2017 and then 15,000 in 2018, both kind of substantial numbers. Can you give me some idea what that heading encompasses?
Last year, for some reason, we never purchased the special playground mulch. So this year, we definitely have to put that in certain areas. And it's about $3,000 per load of 20 yards a load. I know Young's Woods is roughly 1.5 loads. I want to say it's 2 loads at Shaw Place. So that substantially adds up.
What is the reason at Shaw Place for? Because the Shaw Place is very unused as far as I'm aware.
It's a requirement for us to put that playground mulch in for a safe area with the playground area.
Ms. Mealy?
Just to follow up on that, that's not even remotely dealing with the issues that we're having with the playground surface at Memorial Park. Unless that might be what you mean by Bowman Field improvements, which was one of my questions. I highly doubt it.
I'm going to refer that to Mr. Nichols.
Mr. Nichols, we just spent, well, we and several other organizations just spent many millions of dollars at Bowman Field this year. What's the need for the budget increase next year in our expenditures there?
Well, one of the things, the outfield fence was damaged in a windstorm, and it was repaired, but there's some additional work needs to be done. We really want to look at improving the outfield fence as the one project to be accomplished going into the 2018 season. So that's the amount of money. We're hoping to get some reimbursement from MLB. But we did want to budget that amount to address the outfield fence.
Seems to me Bowman Field appeared elsewhere as well in the budget. All of that's for the outfield fence?
Mostly, yes. And
what about turf?
We're also required to, MLB wanted us to maintain the amount of supplies or other things that we did on a normal annual basis for the field. So we're still obligated to spend a certain amount of money on maintaining the field as well.
Well, my understanding had been last year when MLB did all the upgrades to the field, that it actually might cost us more to maintain the field this year because the field is more complex than it has been in years past. Have we considered that? Have we built that potential increase in expenditures just on maintenance at Bowman Field into the budget anyway?
Not for 2018. We're just budgeting the amount of money we normally budget.
Okay, so this
That is
additional
an
funding is
issue.
predicated on we're hoping to deal with the outfield fence.
Correct.
Not predicated on any potential increase in expenditures that might be associated with simply maintaining the improved field.
Well, yeah, Joe, also the maintenance, the other line on maintenance did go from 15 to 25.
Yeah, right.
But again, we're getting additional revenue from the cross gutters. That should all make up the difference that we're increasing, the difference that we're in budgeting in terms of an increase.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to lose any momentum with the field. There was definitely, there's a definite need to address that outfield fence.
Just a second.
Correct.
Okay, so they're dealing with all of the field maintenance currently. Got it. Can we possibly, so that we have a valid number going into 2019, get an estimate from them on what it will cost us to maintain it whenever they do stop maintaining it? I'm just,
You
I
come up
don't
with a
want,
budget, yeah. Yeah, I
if
think
we
should-
don't need to budget it for this year, then fine, I guess that's great. But when we're talking about costs that are suddenly going to be dramatically increasing in years coming up. Right.
Well, keep in mind that we're only obligated preseason, if there's certain games that are played there. Once the cross-cutter season starts, they're obligated to maintain the field.
Okay.
It's not our cost, so, but you're right, we need to work out, there will be some additional costs, I would imagine.
Right, I'm simply concerned about getting surprised by that a year from now or 2 years from now, or whenever it is that it begins to fall to us to deal with the field. That was an expensive field, is my understanding, and I would hate to see us have to do any major overhauls to it. If I can continue with a couple other questions I had?
Sure.
I know that last year was a very light snow year, but we had a pretty dramatic increase in overtime over the budgeted amount. What was that about, and why have we not budgeted that in this year?
That was due to the fluke windstorm we had in May, the excessive flooding we've had this year. Really, it's something you can't predict.
So we don't want to budget for it because we can't predict it, or?
With the trying to keep the no tax increase, I guess that was the biggest reason for not.
Got it.
Right.
Looking at the trend, I think we're safe, we're not safe, but we're consistent around that $9,000 mark, so I think this is,
Okay, so we're just. Oh, yeah, I remember, I mean. Yeah, we're hoping. I'm just it does seem like we're having more and more severe storms. Can't imagine why. And I was, we need to be bearing that in mind, I think, when we're budgeting for things like that. But at least it's helpful to know what caused it. That was a heck of a storm we had. And one other question. The Festival of Lights, the 20, I'm just wondering, I know we usually tend to string up a bunch of C9 bulbs up there, right? That's what they look like, C9s or C7s.
Right.
Once again, it's a relatively piddling number compared to the rest of the budget, but if we looked at like LEDs or anything where the strings might hold up a little better and
We
and
have
they'd use a lot
started
less
switching
light.
over to LEDs.
Okay.
It's going to be a long process with the amount of trees that we decorate out there and the extensive cost of the LEDs.
Right.
But we have started, the snowflakes are LEDs that were recently hung on the poles. I know there's been some purchase of strands of LEDs. It's just a tremendous cost, and I know we just put in the paper that we were looking for donations for Festival of Lights in hopes to help offset the cost of LEDs for next year.
Yeah, it seems like, well, maybe we'll actually have some luck with that, but it seems like we'd be saving ourselves money and of course saving, if the strands hold up well, saving across the board. And I believe, oh, my only other question was, the equipment line item, $12,000 that we did spend last year. In fact, we spent slightly more. What was that for, and why do we not anticipate spending any money on equipment this year?
We used that this year for what's called the bat wings for the gang mowers. We did not put anything in there this year because we moved that money to flood control, which you'll see what our anticipation is there for this coming year, once we make it to that section.
And that's not going to leave the Parks Department short
No.
in terms of equipment
Nope.
for this year? Okay. Thank you.
Other questions on page 14 and 15? Hearing none, that gets us to page 16 and 17, please.
Streets Department, traffic control. Personnel services, salaries, $794,367. Overtime, $40,000. FICA, $63,800. Life insurance, $4,100. Workers' compensation, $38,200. Pensions, $243,000. Health insurance, $360,000. Total personnel services, $1,543,467. Purchase of services, water and sewer, $1,400. Light and power, $15,000. Street lighting, $62,000. Heat, $8,500. Beltway lighting, $7,000. Trash removal, $38,000. Contract services, $65,000. Recycle program, $14,000. Supplies and materials, gas and oil vehicles, $50,000. Protective clothing, $5,400. Supplies and material, $15,000. Storm sewer materials, $7,000. Other expenditures, paint, traffic, $15,000. Traffic controls, $13,000. Hand tools, $300. Vehicle repairs, $6,500. Traffic signal repairs, $8,000. Other equipment repairs, $800. Facility maintenance, $30,000. Bowman Field maintenance, $25,000. Repairs to radios, $7,500. Street resurfacing reconstruction, $125,000. Brick Street resurfacing reconstruction, $50,000. Street resurfacing city liquid fuels, $23,543. Equipment, $30,000. Total department expense, $2,166,410.
Thank you. Comments or questions on page 16 and 17? Mr. Novilla.
Contract services, pretty substantial jump, 45,000. Can you give us some feedback on that?
That is due to costs for the MS4 and stormwater fees.
Other questions? Mr. Allison?
Where was it? Street lighting. How did we manage to spend 45,000 when we budgeted 62?
Because, yeah, I can remember exactly how this went. So I just went over this today, I'm sorry.
A majority of that cost is absorbed through the liquid fuels budget, which is coming up. There is a small portion that they like to keep in the general operating budget. So there's a month or two, typically a year, that's thrown into this budget, along with a portion of the debt service for the streetlight purchase back in 2000 and early 2000s.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the debt services is 5,000, or, yeah, 5,000 per year, but the 2 months is November and December that he's referring to.
Other questions? The one thing I always look for, before I say that, here's the other place where Bowman Field expenditures is up from 15,000 to 25,000, and it's, both of those are expenditures then, if I understood what you said earlier, that will be essentially in this year paying, the 50,000 is the anticipated cost of replacing the outfield fence and other minor issues?
And normal amount of money we spend for field prep.
Right.
And we'll have Spring Bowl again in 2019, or 2018, we anticipate too. So we'll have some maintenance costs associated with those games, which we didn't have in 2018 or 17 since the field was being constructed.
Right. Although I think we budgeted for it that year anyway. And spent it as part of the overall project budget, if I recall. Just not on the spring ball field prep. The other issue that I always bring up when we get to this page is it's kind of hard the way it gets funded to keep track of what the money that we're putting into streets. And so in my notes on this page every year, I try to total it up. And I didn't actually come up with a total today when I did it. But in my calculations, we start with the $125,000 on this page for street resurfacing, add the $50,000 for Bick Street maintenance, and the county liquid fuel streets resurfacing and $23,000. But then we need to pull out of other budgets, and I think I've tracked all these down, but tell me if I've missed anything. $221,000 out of the city's liquid fuel budget will go into the streets, $105,000 out of Act 13, our impact fee money, and $324,000 out of CDBG funds. And so my quick math on that is $850,000 or so, if I did that really quickly, into streets, which sort of, I mean, it's above the number that I kind of look at as the minimum we should be spending. Clearly, we could spend many more dollars than that and need to play catch up on, despite our efforts over the last few years, what have become obviously deteriorating streets. And so 850 is better than 650, which is my kind of minimal number. But really, we ought to be at $1 million, $1.25 million if we could really afford it to over a 5 or 10 year period to really have optimism that we get caught up in where we ought to be. It is what it is, but you know, I think if we're responding to questions that we get from the public on how much we're spending, to have the public understand that we are spending $850,000 in the coming year. Well, hopefully, actually, we spend it in the coming year, but the way it's been going, we won't actually spend this $850,000 until 2019. I would hope that we'd figure out how to get contracts let a little earlier and require our contractors to actually get the work done in the year that the contracts are let. I've still yet to fully comprehend why what happens. But it has been that way for the last 3 or 4 years. Yeah. Okay, great.
We don't receive our community development money until the end of the year.
The end of whose year?
So right now, we would have just received our community development money for 2016. So we just finished up the paving projects for 2016 in 2017. So 2017's paving will actually happen in 2018
So
because of the
maybe-
way the funding sources.
Yeah. Right, sure. And maybe we need a year in which our contract is just our locally controlled funds, and then use 2016's CDBG money with 2017's local funds for that contract, so we can get money spent in the year that we budgeted. And we know, hey, we're planning on paving these streets, and the public asks, and we announce that in the newspaper, and the public gets to November and says, why didn't that happen? And we go, well, find somebody else to blame.
Typically, it's the reverse. They want to use community development because you have to spend a certain percentage by a certain time, and they're not letting us know until late in the game. So usually having the contract open would let them start right on the community development streets to spend their needs.
But
with-
if we
I-
just
it's-
got it, it's not getting spent in 2017.
I understand
The
that, but
plants are
that's
closed.
the issues that we're facing right now with.
But we could have spent whatever we budgeted in 2017, and I didn't add that up in front of what I had. We could have spent the remainder, and if this year was budgeted the way that next year is, we could have spent $500,000 this year. And we spent, well, I guess we spent last year's money this year, but we didn't spend this year's money this year. And we know we get more complaints about the streets than we get for anything else. This money won't get to be spent for a year and a half under the current system of doing it, right?
I see, yeah,
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming
We've
from.
got,
It's just-
because we've gotten so far behind.
I don't know if
we're
it's
going-
because we're far behind, it's
No,
just
no,
the
no,
way that they
I'm sorry, the
allocate
government, the
Okay,
federal
okay.
government has gotten so far behind, we might as well lap them, is my point. Right? And just spend our money. And if we don't get the 324 that we're planning in 2017, let's go ahead and let a bid for whatever the rest is, 525, so that we get some actual street reconstruction done next year using the money we're supposed to have spent in 2017 and the money we're supposed to spend in 2018 and get it done. The money's all there except for waiting on the federal government. Just if they're going to be late, then spend that money as part of the 2019 contract that has 2019 dollars, local dollars, and 2018 federal dollars.
So potentially what Adam and I could work on is for next year, which would actually, we would be paving 2017 would end, and then we could begin 2018.
Right. Using
We
the
would be
money that
able
is
to
in hand.
utilize our in-house funding,
Right.
and then wait until 2019 and utilize those CDBG funds.
Right.
So you're actually paving for 2018 in the year of 2018
Right.
as well as 2019.
Exactly.
And I think that
And by the way,
has
I'm-
happened in the past.
Uh-huh.
It just did not happen this year.
And by the way, I'm not blaming Streets and Parks or you or the administration at all. The
Yeah,
federal
I
government
understand.
is messed up. We know that. They're broken. And there's no sign that they're going to get fixed anytime in the next few years. So we have to adapt, and waiting around until we can't pave is we've learned, I think, not the productive way to go forward. So, let me also then go back to the headline. 850 is a good number. It's a healthy number given what we can afford. We'd love to spend more, but it's what we can afford. So I want to make sure I reinforce that idea. Mr. Anderson.
Just to kind of piggyback on that last thought, though, I mean, perhaps we should take this philosophy in you know, in other areas as well, we should be less dependent on the federal government.
Agreed.
You know, and instead of hoping and wishing that they're going to bail us out, we would do better across the board to take care of our own, and then be surprised when they actually do something from that level. You know, I mean, it's a philosophy. It's a philosophy. But I think we have gotten into just kind of depending on that, and it's creative. It's good. I'm not against using those funds. I think we should use those funds, but we can't allow that constant dependence on those funds to affect our philosophy. This is Williamsport. We ought to take care of Williamsport ourselves as much as possible. Just to throw that out there.
And a piece of that, by the way, that we got ourselves a few years back into a rut on was, oh, we don't have any local money to spend on the roads, so we only have CDBG money, which means we can only fix up certain roads, even though they don't need it nearly as much as other roads that aren't eligible for CDBG. We broke that bad habit, and that's a good thing. But we're playing catch-up for what we did at the time. And I think it's just, you know, they've gotten stalled. They can't get a budget passed. They can't seem to accomplish much of anything down there anymore. So given that, let's move forward on the things that we can be self-reliant for. Mrs. Katz and then Mr. Newell.
I think just for people that are listening, we are getting streets repaired. And to make that, to clarify that, there are streets that are getting repaired. The funding for this does not come in until much later. Can you give an estimate of how many streets were repaired this year? Just off the top of your head, do you have some estimate? Because we have the utilities too that are repairing a lot of streets. So therefore, we are getting some work done.
Sure.
You know,
It's just using old money to get there.
Exactly. So I just wanted to clarify, because people get hyper when they hear this. They think,
Sure.
we're not getting streets, especially if their street isn't getting done.
Old money still spends the same, so.
Sure, we're just
But I think,
later.
yeah.
I mean, we could have some more streets repaired if we weren't waiting around on money that's supposed to be here, and for some reason they can't get their act together. Mr. Newell.
I just want to bring to mind something that Mrs. Katz and Mr. Smith and I have been working on for several years here now, and that is a new sort of connection and communication with the utilities. As far as the streets themselves are concerned, we have made a number of changes in the policies and procedures that apply when they are repairing street cuts. In years past, the utilities were required to warranty those cuts for 2 years. Now it's 5 years. They also are now required to use a different cutting procedure and paving procedure that hasn't been in use only but in the last several years as well. Now we have worked to cut out the washboard effect with a dozen cuts less than so many feet apart from each other. Our committee has worked with the utilities to require that any cuts within a certain distance requires the pavement of the full lane. So those sort of references and caring practices that really don't cost us an awful lot of money, but still contain the elements of keeping our streets as relatively up to date and as well conditioned as they can be in. Also, one other point is we are also, especially at the end of the fall when most of this paving gets done, we're sort of at times at the mercy of the paving company's schedules themselves. We're certainly not their only customers. So that factors in as well. An additional third point then is that utilities often come to us through the middle of the winter months with emergency situations where street cuts are required. I'm sure Mr. Allison understands that. And we certainly have accommodated each one of those requests in emergency situations. So sometimes those cuts can't be repaired in midwinter, so we try to tie them over until the following year. And I think that's in part what Rebecca was talking about, that we carry over some of those expenses because they have to be carried over because of the circumstances involved. But I just want to refresh some memories here about what has been done with regard to helping the streets to be in better condition. Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none. Next, we're on to page 18.
Public Services Flood Control. Personnel Services, Salaries, $93,023. Overtime, $8,000. FICA, $7,700. Life insurance, $500. Workers' comp, $5,250. Pensions, $27,000. Health insurance, $48,000. Total personnel services, $189,473. Purchase of services, water and sewer, $125,000. Light and power, $37,000. Heat, $16,000. Supplies and materials, gas and oil, vehicles, $5,900. Protective clothing, $600. Flood control materials, $20,000. Departmental equipment, $40,000. Vehicle repairs, $3,000. Other equipment repairs, $11,000. Other expenditures, flood levy certification, $100,000. Total department expense, $423,098.
Thank you. Questions? You said you were going to talk about the equipment purchase when we got to this page. Give you an opportunity
Correct.
to do that.
It would be the departmental equipment. We currently have a 1993 John Deere 5320, I believe it is. It is our hillside mower. It constantly on the side of the dike. It takes a beating. Mowing on that degree of an angle is very hard on a piece of equipment. It is not our oldest tractor, but it is the one that needs replaced the most. So that's why we took from parks, moved that money to flood control to assist with the offset of the cost of this tractor.
Okay. And then flood levy recertification, maybe this is for Rebecca. What will the 100,000 in the coming year get? Where along the many steps of the endless process will we take with that 100,000?
This funding will go for the SWIFT plan itself.
Okay.
And then I actually spoke with AMEC this morning, and he had spoken with the Army Corps of Engineers, and after the SWIFT plan, before we would implement the next rehabilitation to the cross pipes and the eye wall, there are other documents that the Army Corps requires. So that's where this funding will go toward, as well as to some of the design for the cross pipes and the eye wall itself.
And in the meantime, we're working on securing the grants for the actual construction of all of these things.
Yes.
The pace of the work that we're doing, working on the SWIFT plan and the things you were just talking about, well, is the pace at a pace that satisfies the Army and FEMA's needs?
As far as I know,
demands?
right now, yes, we are actually a little bit farther along than we actually need to be.
Okay.
After we had submitted our letter of intent, it was in February of this year, that allows us 2 years to have our SWIFT plan completed. So February of 2019, it needs to be completed,
Okay.
which in our SWIFT plan includes the procedure as how you're going to, what needs to come first? Are you going to do the relief wells, the cross pipes, the eye walls? The relief wells, what we were told from the Army Corps, is what needs to begin and be done first. And as you probably remember, the past week, I had brought the proposal from AMEC to begin the design for the relief wells and the rehabilitation. So we are on track, and we're just a little bit ahead of what we actually need to be.
Good, and hopefully by the time, February 19 rolls around, when that has to be done, we'll also have a good financing plan through grants or
Right,
whatever.
exactly, and a lot of that grant funding, we'll utilize for construction, so that's why some of these costs that will come out of this 100,000 will be for the design of all that, so then
Right.
that way, when we get the funding
Right.
from the Army Corps, we can just use that to go ahead and start the construction immediately rather than slowing down the process over a long time frame.
Do you have a sense whether all of the expenses that we've done up to this point, including this 100,000, will all count towards whatever match requirements a particular grant?
Yes.
That it will all count?
Yes, and I've worked with Penn Strategies, and they are getting the documentation so that everything that we use, we can use as match funding.
Okay, because at this
Yep.
point, we've spent well over $1 million, right?
I think it's at like 600 something, but from what I have, all the funding
Okay.
sources that I have that we have spent, because that's what I utilized to take when I had going to DC.
Because I remember a year or two ago, in my head, it was like $800,000.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this would be
So I
at
must be
least
missing
900, but I'm,
some finances somewhere because my list is at 6 something, but that's okay. Can look into it.
John Grado's binder must have not been complete. He used to keep these binders full of resolutions. So make sure we count every penny that we've spent so that we
Yes,
can get a good
definitely.
match going. Mr. Nichols, I'm sure you can help with that.
On a note, in all the public service budgets, you'll notice the salary line items are pretty much stable. That's because we're negotiating with the union right now, and so we did add a little bit of money in legislative contingency. That hopefully will get resolved very soon, so, but again, the only increase or difference in any salary line items may be longevity increases, what have you, so just wanted to mention that.
Thank you very
Thank
much. Any other questions for page 18? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we move to miscellaneous fund budgets. So, page 42. Whenever you're ready. Oh, man, you knocked off the stocking.
Well, somebody's getting cold this year.
He is. Oh, now you're in real trouble. You need to, I suppose, engineer it so that doesn't, never mind.
Projected revenues, liquid fuels, state, $926,633. Interest, $800. Surplus appropriated, nothing. Total projected revenue, $927,433. Projected expenditures, salt and cinders, $65,000. Street materials, $80,000. Street resurface construction, $221,933. Beltway light maintenance, $1,000. Storm sewers and drains, $15,000. Equipment purchases, $140,000. Hand tools, $1,500. Light and power, street, $299,000. Traffic light and power, $24,000. Repairs to vehicles, $80,000. Total projected expenditures, $927,433.
Questions? Mr. Anderson?
On the storm sewers and drain, how much of that do we expect in the coming years will be turned over to the Water Authority?
At this point, we put the 15,000 in there because we don't know how long it will take for the whole transition to happen. As far as giving them the money,
Well,
we can't.
no, that's not what I mean, but how much of that, I mean, obviously, if they're taking those expenses, then we no longer will be.
We will, we are from the inlet and above, so we still have to maintain the
Okay.
inlets. And then with the inlets, you have to put in a riser as well. Now, this is something that we still have to negotiate with WSA and to see exactly who's paying for what exact material. So I think this year, this is just kind of a cushion just to feel it out and see. I mean, we want to be covered because if we have to cover those
Sure.
inlet costs, I mean, so.
Well, it's already down, from the past budget, and that's good. We're looking that direction. I'm just wondering if we're going to continue to see that, hopefully. So, thank you.
Other questions? The power and light number is up, and I know we talked about that a little bit, but is there a particular reason why it's up?
Higher energy costs. At this point, any street that has a street light on it that's PennDOT approved, that's a PennDOT road, we are not allowed to put LED lighting on. It's not PennDOT approved at this point. It's a big argument right now with the 4th Street project. We are fighting, Rebecca and I both, with PennDOT District 3. It's approved in every other district around except for District 3.
So you just gave me another reason to be frustrated with PennDOT.
I'm sorry.
And you think the feds move slowly?
There are no overhead streetlights on West 4th Street from the west side of the bridge to the high school because I will not put them back up until they approve LED lighting. They took them all down for the project to move the poles, and I keep telling them we're not going to put them back up till they approve the LED lighting. In hopes that I
How's
twist
that
their arm
working?
enough that they'll just approve it.
Okay.
Is that going to affect the safety factor on that street, or are we going to be responsible for something that takes place every?
No, because the low mount streetlights are still there. We have a window to put them back up technically. They moved all the poles back further, so once we hang them, we still have to wait for PP&L to come out and restring the power to them.
Okay, thank you for answering my question. Any others? Ms. Mealy?
Just a quick, the equipment purchases in here, I'm assuming are the loader and the roller referenced in the,
The roller is in the general fund. The equipment purchases in there are to finish paying for the recently purchased truck and looking at a new loader for the streets department. The current loader is a 1996. We put extensive money into it this year, and it's just getting worse. It's exceeded its life expectancy.
Any others? Hearing none, move on to then page 38, 39, capital projects fund.
Start with page 38. Projected revenues transfer from debt service, $950,000, that the balance is available for City Hall improvements and the levy project. Department of Conservation Natural Resources, $340,000. This is the amount, grant for Brandon Park and Waste Garden. Transfer from general fund, $25,000 for the Park Avenue study. And transfer from other sources, $25,000 from UPMC Susquehanna. That's another matching funds for Park Avenue. Then there's $798,500 for Pathways to Health Phase 4, for the Transportation Alternatives Project Grant. Undetermined Army Corps of Engineers, $750,000. Again, as discussed, the project for the relief wells, $1,250,000. The hope is a grant from the Army Corps, $750,000, with the $500,000 available in the financing package. East Third Street Revitalization Project State, $3,422,873. This is matching funds, part of the funding strategy developed by Delta Development and reviewed by ERC and Council. Local, 179,141, and private, 1,329,167, which is a combination of the First Community Foundation grant that we were able to get, as well as some additional money from Lycoming College, for a total $7,719,681. And that matches the expenditures on the next page. The Park Avenue Planning Study at $50,000. The City Hall project, possibly some money for fire headquarters, $450,000. Brandon Park and Waste Garden, $250,000, $90,000. The DCNR grant for both of those. Levee improvements related to the relief wells, $1,250,000. Pathways to Health Phase 4, $798,500. And then again, the funding strategy, the expenditure package for East Thursday Revitalization Project, $4,831,181, for total for $7,719,681.
Questions or comments? Ms. Mueller.
Are we actually anticipating moving forward with East Third Street this year? I know we have two simultaneous concerns, that is to say that we want to move forward with PennDOT, but we also want to move forward so that there's some motion down there. How realistic do we think it is to plan to spend these funds in that neighborhood this year?
We received from Multimodal, the CFA, from DCD, $777,347. That's primarily for East Third Street, but we have a grant in to PennDOT for multimodal of $1.5 million, which will fund the Basin Street and Franklin Street realignment project, and that we hope will take place next year. We should be hearing very shortly on that particular grant. And of course, then we have matching funds from Lycoming College as well as First Community Foundation partnership. We did submit, if you recall, Green Light Go not too long ago. And we also have in place the ARC grant, which relates more to Pine Street than East Third Street. But the goal is, right now, the college is taking the lead on the Basin Street, Franklin Street part of the project. And we are continuing to work on a transportation impact study, TIS, with PennDOT. They continue to have monthly meetings, and it's sort of turned into a two-phase project with Basin Street, Franklin Street going maybe a little bit faster than East Third Street. I wanted to keep it as one project because of the two-way part between Mulberry and Market. It seems to still be a hang-up, and there may be more money needed for additional transportation impact studies, but it's moving along.
So yes, is that a yes?
I guess that's a
Ground
yes.
will be broken in 2018?
I met with Dirk and Edson last week, and the plan is to have the realignment of Franklin Street and the new building for Lycoming College completed next year. That's the plan and hope.
That'd be awesome.
Completed in 2019?
The building would be complete in
I think
2019.
we want to.
Right.
Okay, I think we're planning to break ground in the spring of 2018.
Okay.
Sorry.
And we continue to press forward for the two-way traffic between Mulberry and Market.
Will we all be raising a glass sometime soon that you've been victorious in that effort, Mr. Nichols? Or that we have all been, perhaps. We'll see, but that's everything.
Other comments or questions on the capital projects budget? Hearing none. Act 13 fund.
Act 13 is pretty straightforward. That's on page
44.
44. We're projecting $350,000 from Act 13, and expenditures are the same as they've been. For street resurfacing and rehabilitation, under $5,000. Bond debt service, $200,000, and another set aside for graphics run flood mitigation, $45,000.
Comments or questions? I wanted to kind of reiterate the question that was asked earlier about the inlets. At what point and to what degree will the Water and Sewer Authority be taking over responsibility for next steps in Graphius Run?
As of right now, we are planning to put out a proposal to do a complete overview of Graphius Run. The authority is in on that, and they have been along our side.
Right.
Again, they are from below ground, so their primary, I guess, what they'll be focused on will be the culvert itself, but they have been very open to help mitigate the problem up above, which is still above ground, if that
So
helps.
in the next phase of the study, then, we'll be partners in it, in its expense?
Yes.
Okay.
What percentage, I'm not 100%, but yes,
Yeah, sure,
they want to be in on it, yes.
Okay, so, because I know we did the first study that got us so far, and we knew that that was only going to get us so far, but the idea is some or all of it would be handed over to their responsibility in the next phase, and that's happening, but we will retain responsibility for developing a new system for Graphius, is what I'm understanding it. Okay, thank you. Other questions on the Act 13 budget? And of course, this number is an estimate because we got $428,000 in 2016. In 2017, it's 2016's dollars. So we got 428, but we don't know what 2017's dollars. You're estimating $350,000. We came in over estimates. We'll hope that that happens again. With new development occurring again, you know, that we maybe will stop seeing a slide in that figure. Because I believe the year before, do you happen to have that?
500,016.
In 16, it was 500,000 in actuals. Yeah, so we saw a $72,000 decline. Hopefully, well, even if we see another $70,000, it'll be right at budget figure this year, and hopefully it will stop declining. Okay, any other questions? Then we debt service on page 43.
Joe is going to be taking the lead on that one.
Mr. Debt?
Dr. Debt.
I just want to commend Joe. He spent countless hours putting this together. I mean, there's a lot of work coordinating, you know, with the department heads and putting up with me and guidance from the mayor. And but he did a great job. Just would appreciate that.
Alec, how are you this evening?
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for asking. How are all you?
Great.
I guess we're on the debt service budget, page 43.
Yeah, yes.
On the revenue side, transfer from general fund, $535,500. Transfer from other funds, $152,500. And transfer from Act 13 fund, $100,000. For total projected revenue of $788,000. Projected expenditure, transfer to capital projects, $950,000. Payment of long-term debt, $526,000. Interest expense long-term, $250,000. And interest expense short-term, $12,000. For total projected expenditures of $1,738,000.
Comments or questions? In my understanding that basically we've booked the actual revenue from 2017, it's just carrying over to 2018. That's how it's out of balance.
That's correct. We had to draw down the money as part of our refinancing to have the full 2.5 million drawn.
So in essence, on revenue or funds available, we have $1,788,000 more or less, or seven. In essence, it's balanced between.
Yes, it is balanced between the two budgets.
If we added 1.7 and 788, it would equal 752 and 1.738.
Yep.
Yep, okay. Other comments or questions? Mr. Slaughter.
Is this where the Looking at the interest expense short term, that's the 1,000 to,
That is on our line of credit. No, the TRAN, the tax anticipation note, is on page 24. It's the only line, or it's the only item on that page.
okay. I just see that,
The 12,000 short-term is on our line of credit, which we've borrowed money down, or we've drawn money down to cover the waiting period for the Bowman Field Racby project, which we expect to have done early next year, or the reimbursement back in early next year.
Have all the other RECP project reimbursements now been completed?
With the exception of retainage.
Okay.
They maintain it until the state comes in and does their final audit, so I think there's 2.5%.
Okay, but the problem from earlier in the year where we weren't getting the funds from old RACP projects is now
We've
resolved?
cleared everything out on all the prior projects with the exception of the retainage.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on debt service? Ms. Mealy?
Talk to me about the $220,000 in savings that we're realizing on debt service and where that shows up in the budget, or fails to show up in the budget, and how much of our anticipated savings on debt service with the new refinancing of the bonds that comprises.
I can break it down. You're not going to see as much of it because if you recall in previous budgets, we've never budgeted the full amount because we were expecting the $2.5 million drawing down over time. So we'd have to start to incorporate those numbers into the 2018 budget. So while it may not look on a paper standpoint that you're saving that 220, the numbers actually do reflect that. If you would then go through and show what you would have needed to pay out if we hadn't refinanced.
Got it.
Just, let me ask a clarifying question. So what you're saying is, if we were looking for 220, the place we would be able to find it is in a 5-year budget projection, but we don't have that.
Correct.
Okay.
And then secondary question, our total savings in debt service projected by the refinancing was, I think, $400,000 for the city, 438 maybe, right?
I'm sorry, what was?
Over the 20-year period.
Over the course of the 20-year period, our total projected savings in debt service due to the refinancing of our city bonds was something in the neighborhood of somewhere between 400 and 440,000.
But that, she means for the city as opposed to RVT?
RVT and the city both, and the parking authority altogether totaled 1.1. But the city's portion of the savings, it seems to me from the forms from the numbers we were looking at when we ratified that last week.
600 for the city, 500 for RV, a little over 500 for RVT.
Okay, so we're taking 220,000 this year, though we can't really see it, and then anticipating something similar next year, so that we'll begin paying full debt service in maybe 3 years' time, something like that. We'll stop utilizing savings. Dramatically less than 220,000. At some point, it's about 3,000, right?
Parking authority is minimal, I forget what the amortization.
Entails that.
Yeah, entails, yeah, right.
Right. Okay, so our the total savings we realize will be somewhere around 600,000. We're taking 220,000 this year, which is, let's be honest, the lion's share, over the course of a 30-year.
Over 17 and 18, over a 2-year period.
Oh, we are taking, so the
It is
220.
a 2-year period because of the refinancing, we didn't make our final interest payment this year. So there was a savings on that end, and then there'll be savings again in 2018. So the 220 is over a 2-year period.
Okay, got it. All right, we'll work on nailing it down, but I think I've got all the answers to the questions I have right now. Thank you, Joe.
Other questions on debt service budget? Hearing none, City Hall operating budget, page 41.
For projected revenues, rental income interior, $339,275. Rental income exterior, $2,100, for total revenue of $341,375. Under projected expenditures, salaries, $25,922. FICA, 2,000, life insurance, 375, workers' comp, 1,300, pensions, 13,500, health insurance, 11,000, supplies and materials, 13,000, telephones, 48,000, water and sewer, 3,000, heat, 24,000, electricity, 38,000, repairs, other equipment, 5,000, maintenance, 40,000, contracted services, 45,000, contingency, 35,000, furniture and carpet, 10,000, and machinery and equipment, 35,000, for total expenditures of $350,000, or $350,097.
Comments or questions? Mrs. Katz?
What we're trying to do with that is for any necessary wiring or infrastructure replacements
okay.
for technology with part of the building renovations. Yeah. It was the only area that we could lump it into in this budget.
Question about the rental income. I noted that in the departments, just sampling a couple of them, the rental income or rental expense went up, and as I understand it, that's based on the share of the building that
Space allocation.
Space allocation. In the planner budget, which is new space allocation, there's office rental. Did the office rental expense for one of the departments decline as a result?
That is space that was never built out before. Community development can't or would have paid for their space allocation based upon the indirect cost allocation.
Okay.
Because their admin cap doesn't permit them to do the indirect cost allocation, this is actually new money. The planning space is now new money coming in.
Okay, so that's one of the things that then is helping to fund, without reducing the cost to other departments, proportionality.
Yeah.
But it's what's helping to fund the, whatever it is, $14,000 increase in the expenditure budget.
And once we figure out what we're doing with space for all departments with the planned renovations, then we'll have to reallocate everyone and we'll get a better grasp as to space utilization.
Okay. And then my other question is on maintenance. We went $20,000 over budget. I assume that was something that we did not anticipate, and then we've increased the budget for part of that this year to $40,000 compared to the budget last year of $30,000.
I think there was a big attempt in trying to get some of the HVAC issues resolved.
Okay.
There was a new contractor that came in and was trying to identify the issues and solve or repair the issues.
Okay.
One of the things that we're looking at is, to continue to fix the problems we have with our HVAC system, but RVT is also, in this past year, brought in an HVAC technician. So we're trying to utilize that individual and reimburse RVT for the time used.
Okay.
Similar to what we've done with other, like Markley and the Markley and Wright positions in the past.
Sure. And so hopefully what we'll see is if we develop and implement the City Hall and other facility the plan that we, I think, had an estimate from our architect for, I think it was about $750,000 if we did everything. But we have $450,000 funded already. Maybe once we implement that, some of the maintenance costs then can go back down. And we'll realize some return on our investment. But that probably won't happen at the beginning of the year, and so it's good to have maintenance funds available. Other questions on City Hall operating? Hearing none. Unemployment comp fund, page 40.
For unemployment, projected revenues, transfer from the general fund, 10,000, transfer from utility fund, 5,000, for total revenues of 15,000, and projected expenditures for unemployment claims, 15,000.
Comments or questions? Hearing none, then the pool repairs capital fund.
Under the pool repairs capital fund, we're showing projected revenues, transfer from general fund of 2,000, And then just to show the available surplus, it's a 102,914 for a total available balance of 104,914.
And just a comment here from me before I ask for questions. This was the fund council established at the completion of the Memorial Park pool project with the idea that we had learned our lessons from the past expenses passed along to us when capital improvements and repairs were not funded at the time the commitments were made. And so we were able to take some excess revenue and then add to it on a yearly basis, knowing that at some point a major repair will be needed, and we won't have to find the money in the moment to try to make that repair. And hopefully we'll, by doing that, model other opportunities to do the same thing in a responsible way going forward. The only question I have here is, I thought I remembered that we had an expense that was going to be drawing a little bit of this down in this fiscal year. That didn't happen,
We found alternate solutions for that.
which is a good thing if you can pay for it out of your operating funds. So I'm glad to see that build. If others have ideas of where to establish similar funds and then how to fund them for other capital expenses, I'm all ears. That's the last of our budgets to be reviewed tonight. Any other comments on this one? Mr. Henderson?
Just a question, how do we tell whether or not we use the capital, the pool repairs capital fund budget or the line item in the pool budget on page 21 for pool equipment repairs?
Well, how do we determine which we would use?
Yeah.
We would have to get approval from council. Currently, there's no expenditures allocated in that budget, so we are not authorized to spend any of that money. We'd have to request an appropriation from that in order to be able to utilize those funds.
That's something we would be interested in doing instead of having that budget expense from the pool budget. Would we be interested in doing something like that? Is there a reason we wouldn't?
Here's my philosophical approach to that. Of course, I'm just one person, but that you have on any particular asset, you're going to have anticipated annual operating expenses, right? We know that, every year we might need to maintain this or replace this share of things. But what you can't anticipate in the short run, but you can anticipate that will happen at some point in the future, is a larger one-time expense, or at least a periodic expense, once every 5 years or 10 years. And so the idea is to build up so that, let's say in 10 years we need a brand new liner. We've got $200,000 or whatever liner cost, we've got it sitting there ready to go. But on an annual basis, we budget the amount that can be anticipated year in and year out.
I think we increased that last year from 1,000, right? Did we?
I don't have it in front of me, but maybe.
I think we did. All right, that makes sense.
And putting in 1,000 or 2 is just a token increase,
Yeah.
but it adds up over time, and then it's responsible so that a future council doesn't have to come up with something that we could anticipate eventually needing. It's responsible, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Other questions on this budget? Hearing none, that brings us to the end of tonight's budget review. So we move on the agenda to announcements. The next budget session will be held Wednesday, 2 nights from now, on November 29th at 7 p.m. City Hall Council Chambers. The next regularly scheduled City Council meeting that will be include the first reading of the budget will be held Thursday, December 7th. That's also here at 7:30, our normal time. I should have said this at the beginning. We can make amendments anytime we choose, whether it's in the budget session or at the first or second reading. And so, while of course that would any amendments would exclude Mr. Slaughter because he's not yet officially serving on council, I want to remind my colleagues that that can happen. Are there any other announcements by members of council? Hearing none, Mayor, your administration.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councilman Henderson for his assistance with the upcoming MOU between the city and the Williamsport Waves. The MOU will be placed in your Friday's packet and will be scheduled to go on next week's Public Works agenda and forwarded to the full body of City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any comments out there in the general public?
We scared them all off.
I think we did. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everybody. See you Wednesday.